we're going to get started. So I'll just say, when I was lying in bed awake at 2 o'clock this morning, this is what I was hoping for. So thank you all for getting out of bed on a Saturday morning and coming to spend significant time with us talking about matters of real substance for the city of Newport. I'm really grateful to all of you. I'm especially grateful to some folks who have put hours and hours and hours of work into the process of getting us here. And that we'll introduce all of the department heads. You'll get to talk with them this morning. But so certainly all of the folks who manage the various departments of the city are on that list. All of our council meetings intend to be here today, and I think 3 of the 4 of them are here, besides myself. Kevin isn't here yet, but I suspect he will be here this morning. So I'm grateful to Carter and to Andrew and John and Kevin for all the work they've done. And we have the members of the Financial Task Force, I think, all represented. Am I right, Carter? Are we missing anybody?
I believe we're all present.
So
yeah, full force.
Raise your hand, Hal over there, and Lori, and Susie, and is there any, who am I missing? That's it for the moment, right? And then I really, Carrie never lets me say thank you or how much I appreciate her without telling me that it's not enough. But I want to say to all of you that none of this could have happened without pretty tireless effort from Carrie Schultz, who joined us in late August with very little direct experience in budget work, certainly for a municipality, and not that much for us. And she's been drinking from a fire hose for months. And while I do not hold her responsible for the numbers themselves, I am grateful because all of the spreadsheet work that has to happen behind the scenes to make a complicated budget like this come together are Carrie's work. And the one person I want to mention and call out that we can't welcome today in person is Chip Stearns, who the city hired back in early May, late April, early May, when we realized we were facing some really serious questions and we didn't even know where to begin. So we went to NEMRIC, which stands for New England Municipal Resource Center. They're the ones who provide the software that does budgeting for almost every city in the state of Vermont. And we were in a first conversation with them asking unrelated questions, and they said, oh, well, one thing we do is we provide consulting and sometimes step in when a city doesn't have a financial manager. And we said, really? And 2 weeks later, we signed a contract with NEMRIC, and Chip Stearns spent hours and hours and hours last summer getting us through the immediate financial challenges that we were confronting. Ellen and Chip became quite well acquainted with each other because Ellen was our primary banker through those conversations, and Chip is finishing a 2-week vacation today and is not able to be here. But I just cannot say enough about his work. And I think the only other person, unless Carter, you got somebody else, I'll let you chime in. The only person I want to welcome right now is Lyle Jepson. Lyle, can you wave at everybody right here? Lyle grew up here in Newport, graduated from North Country, taught at North Country for a couple of years, and has had a circuitous route that I'll let him tell you about later that has eventually led to, just a couple of months ago, being named by the governor as the commissioner for the Department of Economic Development for the state of Vermont. He made a trip up here almost immediately to meet with us and learn more about what's going on in Newport with our development plans. And so this is his second trip to Newport in 3 months, and he's been in several other meetings with us. So Lyle, so grateful for your support, and he'll be speaking with us later this morning when we finish the budget work. And then last thing I'll say before I hand it up, anybody else we should name, Carter, that I've missed?
No, not.
Okay. And if I've missed you, feel free to tell me and I'll recognize you later. It's always dangerous to say thank you to people because the list is long. Actually, there are some other people I should just mention. There are some people in this room who do not have a formal role with the city of Newport, but who have shown up for, I am not exaggerating, every single meeting of task forces and council meetings and raised lots of questions, and I think have really helped us to point in the right direction. So while I'm not going to point those folks out in person, I just want you all to know that that kind of citizen engagement is critically important to this community, and we're really grateful for that. And of course, Pam shows up at every meeting and films so that many, many more people can watch what's going on, and she's doing that today for us as well. So thank you, Pam Latz. Okay, so the plan for the morning is that we have prepared, Carrie and the department heads have put together a slide deck that will give, and you have the opportunity, you may have it in front of you already. We're going to run through the slide deck and in the process hear from all of the department heads. I'm not going to take questions during that presentation. The goal is to get through it, and then we're going to give you all a little bit of time in silence, because my wife is Quaker and I've learned the value of silence. A little bit of time in silence for you to write down questions before other people start talking. Because some people, like me, think while other people are talking and with our mouths open. And other people, like my wife, think when they have quiet and silence to do so, and it's actually a distraction and hard for them. So we're just going to create maybe a 10-minute period for people to jot down questions as they look at the budget and think about the presentation. And then we're going to give you a little bit of time in small groups around your tables to share your questions with each other and create kind of a list of the common themes and the questions that are coming up for you that feel important. And then Carter's going to circulate with a microphone, and we're going to start asking questions that either department heads will be able to answer, or Carrie and Carter and I will be able to answer, because Carter's been sharing the work of this financial task force for 10 months almost now. Or if we cannot answer the question, which is entirely possible. So I keep trying to reassure everybody on the staff, if we can't answer a question this morning, that's our answer. And we say to all of you, we're going to write down the question, try and come up with the answer, and we will send an email to everyone who signs that piece of paper with a list of the answers that we come up with for questions we can't answer this morning, okay? So we'll do that Q&A through some period of time when we feel like we've either exhausted our time or exhausted ourselves and our questions. We'll go back to small groups one more time and ask if there's anything else that you would like to make sure that we hear. So there will be another opportunity for small group conversation briefly, and then we'll do a little bit, if there's time in there, we'll try and create an opportunity for people to speak briefly. I'm going to put you on like a 2-minute timer for public comment today, okay? But you will have the opportunity, if you want, to raise any other questions you feel like have not been raised through the morning, or share any concerns. If they're not questions, they can just be, are we thinking about this? Can you please make sure we're paying attention to this? Okay, when we get done all of that, we'll see where we are and whether we have time. We may or may not take a break before we move into Lyle Jepson's presentation. So that brings me to the next thing, which is that there are 2 bathrooms here, and there are 2 bathrooms at the top of the stairs, one in the hallway and one in the council room. And there's an elevator for those who need mobility help. So you feel free throughout the morning to help yourself to the refreshments that Mike and the rec crew and Esther from the senior center downstairs have put together for you all. Just stand up, move around. If you don't like sitting for a long time, that's fine. Just stand up and do what you need to do to be comfortable this morning, okay? And then on the table, my mother, who loves to participate in everything in any way she can, has made homemade cookies, and those are on all the tables. So eat as many as you like, and whatever you don't eat, we'll take down to Winter Saturdays, because we have our first Winter Saturday for Newport Downtown Development tonight at 6 o'clock in the Tasting Center this year. We've moved locations, so don't come to the Gateway. We'll be in the Tasting Center. Come eat more cookies. And Dawn Phillip from the Flaky Crust is going to open up tonight, so that's people can buy dinner from Dawn if they want. There will be a cash bar that Eleanor Legere is going to run from Eden Specialty Ciders, and then a great band, Sleeveless Tees, is going to be playing tonight. And we've totally decorated and tried to deal with sound issues. There's been a big group of volunteers, some of whom are in the room this morning, who have strung lights and turned all of our push carts into bass traps. We filled them all with insulation so that they will capture sound that's echoing in that room. So we've done a lot of work and spent some money to try and make that sound work, and we'll see how it goes tonight. It's a total experiment, okay? So that brings me to the end, I think. Carter, do you want to add anything else before we launch into the presentation?
No, I kind of want to do a brief walkthrough of how we got here.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Please.
All right, so last fall, in the midst of figuring out a lot of you guys are probably aware of our financials that we have discovered and handled, and we worked with Kathleen Ramsey, who is the Municipal Operations Specialist for Vermont, City of Leagues and Towns, no wait, Vermont League of Cities and Towns, sorry, all the acronym, got the words. So Kathleen met with us, and we were just trying to transition to more of like a strategic approach to our budget process. Eventually, the term is priority-based budgeting, but with our current timeline and this fiscal year, the best we can do is bring back this discussion and dialogue around our budget. The Australian ballot, it's effective. We get more people that can come out throughout the day and cast their vote, but there is no back and forth. There is not this. So I'm very, very warmed and just so appreciative of those that showed up to join this discussion, because this is a step in the right direction. We're going to be having a more in-depth value-based conversation around our budget and the services our city provide. But this is the beginning of it, and I'm really appreciative of all that could come this morning on a Saturday. Yeah, I think that's kind of the gist.
I think so. If you have trouble hearing us, please wave at us and get our attention. We will both try and project, and Mike has bought us a new sound system. So we actually have actual sound in here this morning. Where it is problematic is if the heat blowers kick on, we'll try and project above it. But if you can't hear, say so and we'll address it, okay?
That's possible.
Okay, you want to start us?
Perfect. I locked my clicker. First, we're going to start with just the department overview. So this is, first we're going to show you, they're all here, but here's some lovely photos. These are the folks that run our city and have different roles that they will kind of dive into. And some are in the municipal building. You may recognize some of these faces, but they all really help the city accomplish services across the board. And I don't want to say too much because they're about to have a time at the mic. But we do have a vacant city manager position that this council is actively working on recruiting, so to be determined. All right.
Okay, I think I was going to take this one.
Yeah.
We'll just talk to each other because
perfect.
Carter and I ran this once last night and agreed on how we would try and approach this.
This is the general fund.
So here you go. Some overview things that you should know as we approach this budget. Our total budget, the city budget is broken into three different parts, three different funds. One is called the general fund, and that's the budget that you all get taxed on your property taxes for, okay? And then there are two other funds. One is the water fund, and the other is the sewer fund. And those are run independently from the budget of the city, the general fund, and they have the payment, the expenses incurred in the water and sewer fund are covered by utility rates, what we charge for water and sewer from folks in the community. We're going to focus almost entirely today on the general fund, but there is a slide that will show you the proposed budget we've been working on for water and sewer at the end. So we'll show you that. And just so you know, the city council basically is responsible to act as water and sewer commissioners. So we're going to go out of our way this year to make sure that part of the city council's deliberation is not just to review and pass the general fund budget, but also to have deep conversation, which we've been working on, around water and sewer. So this is just general fund. And right now that budget comes in at just shy of $9.5 million a year. Now that will sound really high to those of you who pay attention, because that's considerably more than we tax you for. That number includes all of the expenses of the general fund of the city, and then we back out any revenue that we can take in. So examples of that would be revenue when we support the town of Coventry for the fire department, and they pay us to do that. Or when Travis's team dispatches, we charge for that, and that brings in almost $300,000 a year. Or when we get grant income that comes in, that's income that can help us. Or when Mike charges people to stay at Valley Beach Campground, right? All of that revenue comes off the top of this budget before we charge tax to the folks in the city, okay, the community residents. So of that budget, just to give you a sense of how it works, you can go back and look later at our M&M exercise to see how closely you came to this. 22% of that budget in the budget that we are talking about this morning is what we're referring to here, the one that's proposed right now for next year, which, by the way, is a draft and could easily change based on today's conversation. We're calling the coming week Budget Week. All the staff were asked to be in town, so what we learned today can be a part of whatever we do next. Okay? So 22% of this $9.486 million is public works, 8.6% is recreation, 12.3% is government operations, and that's a new thing. We did not, now we have combined basically all services that are managed out of this municipal building, with the exception of the police department, are all called government operations. So that includes the treasurer and clerk's offices downstairs, as well as the city manager, financial operations, and Frank's work upstairs with zoning and assessment. That's all in government operations. Then we've got 28% of our overall budget is our police department. 2.9% is the fire department. And then you'll see right here, debt service is 5.2%. So when we bought a new fire truck this fall and spent, what was it, Ellen, $870,000 roughly on that at the end of the day, right? That money is not, the debt payments on that are not coming in fire, they're actually coming in debt service, just so you know, okay? When you all voted, I hope you all voted, last August to allow us to borrow $1.3 million for, what you allowed us to do was borrow up to $1.8 million, and we were able to drop that to a debt of $1.3 million. We borrowed that money over 10 years, and that's in debt service, okay? Capital is our effort to begin to recreate a proactive approach to the things that will need to be maintained and replaced over the coming 5 years. So we're not doing it all at once, it's just this year's effort, this coming year's effort for trying to manage capital expense. And one last thing I'll say about that before we get to a broader thing or more specifics is we have been in the habit for some years of replacing things like police cars on a regular basis every year and doing it on credit, borrowing money to buy those. And we're trying to break ourselves this coming year of that habit. So the current budget that you will see from the police department for debt includes, no, it's actually in capital expense, includes the outright purchase of a police car for $70,000, I think, right, Travis, or something like that? Okay, so we'll talk more about that, but just so you know, that's another conceptual shift that's taking place. We're trying to wean ourselves off money that we have to borrow and pay for and depend only on ourselves wherever we possibly can. And then finally, miscellaneous. Can you remind me, Carrie, what's in miscellaneous? Yeah, we'll talk about it more, but it's got things like the recycling center, what we pay for ambulance services, county taxes that we pay, appropriations, and anything that we have to spend to help pay for our portion of grants that maintain the city building here. I think I got all those. So we'll be more specific. Anything you want to add to that, Carter?
No, I just want to say, I did sneak a peek at the M&M activity, and there are a heavy amount of M&Ms in the debt service. So that's one, at least lesson, or at least takeaway. But we're also going to have a slide on this. It's actually my slide, so towards the end, but we'll go into detail with that.
And last thing about debt is there's other kinds of debt in the water and sewer funds.
Yes.
Right? That the 2.6. We borrowed short-term from Pasumsic. We were allowed to borrow up to $2.827 million. We haven't spent anywhere near that in the last few months. Eventually, we're going to convert that to a 25-year note for $2.6 million. None of that debt service is reflected in your general budget. That's all in the water budget. And when we borrowed $870,000, we were given permission in August to borrow up to $1 million to cover the sewer deficit. We ended up borrowing $870,000. That doesn't get reflected in this budget either. It's in the sewer budget. Okay? All right, let's keep going.
Well, all right. This is a little reprieve, talking about revenues. Obviously, about 2/3 of the city's budget for general fund is raised by taxes, but there is, again, a litany of other ways that the city can help offset those costs. I think operations is, no wait, what was I going to say? Oh, pilot, that's what I was going to explain. Payment in lieu of taxes.
Yes, so actually we should say a quick word about that. I hear a lot of people in the city complain about the fact that the government, the state government, owns so much of our property and they don't pay anything. I just want you to know that's not true. They pay a pilot, which is payment in lieu of taxes. This year it was $640,000 that we took in, I think it was October, Jim, right? October or November. So it's not that, I mean, it's not that we couldn't be making more on that property if it were fully on the tax rolls, but it's also not true that they're not paying anything. They're paying a significant amount.
Thank you. All right, this is when we're gonna pass it off to department heads to just give a brief overview, and Mike is up first.
Oh, okay, I'll stand right here. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Brown. I'm the Director of Recreation. I think a lot of you know what recreation do. We do the fun stuff, but I'll list off some of the things that we do, just so that way you're familiar. So we manage the operation of all the city facilities. Prouty Beach Campground, Day Camp, Gardner Park, the Skate Shack, the Harbor, the Gateway, the gym, Preschool Play World. I think there's more there, but that's a good starting list. We also plan community events like Fall Fest, Haunted Woods, Easter Egg Hunt, Citywide Yard Sale, 4th of July, the fireworks, Pumpkin Palooza, the list goes on and on. So we do the fun stuff. So we currently have 2 full-time employees, that includes myself, and 24 part-time people, and those are our day camp counselors, our ticket booth staff, our dock hands. Let's see, what else? So upcoming special events, special projects this year, we're planning on improving the skate shack, doing siding, new windows, final windows, another door egress to the other side of the public rink in the parking lot. It's probably one of the most used buildings in the city during the winter, and the improvements are much needed. We're also planning on doing siding on the bathroom at the playground at Prouty Beach. We did renovations there a few years ago, and we just need to complete that project. So those are our projects that are on the budget for this year. Overall, on the budget that we're proposing, we project an increase of revenue of about 13%. And that's reflected in an increase in transient rentals at the campground. We built 8 new full hookup sites thanks to Public Works, and we have a new family cabin. So what we did in the budget is we factored out the income, and we did about 50% occupancy for the summer, and we included that number in revenue. So we think that's a safe bet. And on the expense side, we propose a decrease of about 15%. So that's the rec department overview. Thank you very much.
All right, I will slide forward. This is in your packet, and they will also be online too.
Excellent. So if anybody wants a staycation, come check out the family cabin at Prouty Beach Campground. A little shameless plug there.
Can I just say a word about this slide? This is actual to...
Yeah, so this is where we are right now, and you'll see we're over 50%. Most of our expenses and I guess income comes in the first half of the fiscal year, because we run 4 months of the operation at Prouty Beach, so July, August, September, October. Same thing at the harbor. So most of all of our stuff, income and expenses, is front-ended. So that's the reason why we're a little bit skewed there.
Right, and I just want to remind folks that the fiscal year runs from July through, like that's from the beginning. So if you're not familiar with municipal budgeting, it correlates perfectly with Mike's.
That's exactly, because the campground's open when we get July, August, September, October.
Right. Oh, all right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, what? This, correct. So our fiscal year started in July, so this is about halfway through. So good question, Eleanor, thank you. So about 50% is roughly halfway, and that's what you
Yeah, and we're over 50% because of all of our stuff is front-ended.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Well,
we're
I
just
guess,
gonna keep moving
sorry.
with the questions
Boom,
after.
boom. All right. Tom.
Who's next?
Good morning, everybody. I apologize up front. I'm not a public speaker like Mike is, but Public Works isn't as glamorous. We don't bring in revenue as much as everybody else, but we are the push behind the scenes. You want to look at the slide?
Make sure you hold the mic up.
Oh, sorry. Very proud of my staff. This summer was kind of an interesting one. We've gotten into projects in the last few years that people actually see. Typically, we do work in the streets, and nobody sees the work we actually accomplish. Gardner Park Playground, with the wood structures, building the park itself. I did add in the monster truck. We did quite a bit of work at Prouty Beach Campground. Renewed the playground a little bit there. These are projects myself and my staff have been very proud of. Like I said, we don't, most people don't see what it is that we do. But we do maintain the city of Newport, sidewalks, streets, water, sewer, stormwater, all the infrastructure. This coming year, well, actually back in August, we started a water meter install. We had been doing them, but we took a different stance and we're hitting it very aggressively. We're hoping that people will reach out to us. If they contact us, and get this really going, I truly believe by August of this year we could have most of them installed. We're going to finish up the Lakemont Road water system. We've got half of it completed this past fall. And then we plan on doing street paving infrastructure on Eastern and Prospect Street to renew those two streets and bring them up to the, today's standards. We'll get 40, 50, 60 years of life out of those roads. Sure. I did want to mention that we're not talking about sewer and water, but I do have 12 full-time staff for Public Works, including myself, but I also have 4 other staff members that deal with strictly just the water and the sewer department. Then we oversee recycling, the city landscaper, and maintenance of all facilities in the city of Newport. I guess that's about all I have to say.
Are you in charge of the flowers on Main Street? Who does all the flowers?
So the city landscaper, Robert, works under me. The greenhouse, I don't know if since we started that program, we built the greenhouse at the wastewater facility. It is an expense to the city of Newport, but it certainly, again, it's one of these projects that we always did things that nobody ever saw. And just to beautify the city, I think it attracts a lot of people here. So to me, personally, I think it's money well spent. If you can't have a community you're proud of, really, who's going to want to come here?
Tom, that's about 90,000 out of your total budget, right?
Well, Roberts is separate
Yes.
from Public Works.
I think it's included here, though.
We included it in here just for the sake of, because you oversee it. It's in this budget, and I do want to labor that the revenue is an interdepartmental billing to water and sewer. So although Tom oversees those staff, they are compensated, like this is part of the equation and the fun math of municipal budgeting.
Actually, I think we should, this is a
Oh.
change, so I'm just going to...
Oh, sorry, I've
that
dated
just a little bit.
information. Sorry, I'm not
So
on the water sewer
no,
task
it's
force.
okay. I want to be really clear because we're all trying to figure this out. One of the things Chip Stearns really encouraged us to do, and that the finance team considered and then encouraged as well, is that we stop trying to allocate portions of salaries across budgets. So, for instance, Tom's is the easiest example of this. Historically, Tom's salary has been divided roughly in thirds between water, sewer, and general fund public works. That's not what's going on here. This budget, can you go back to the pie chart for a second? Okay, that salaries and benefits portion, which is 60% of his budget, includes all of the public works employees, but not the 4 people who are dedicated just to water and sewer. And Tom has 3 other employees besides himself who do work for water and sewer. And so the way Chip has encouraged us to handle this going forward is that those people whose time is divided are all covered in the general fund, and part of the income that we make back to support the general fund is money that we charge the water budget or the sewer budget for the time that they're using general fund staff. Okay, so it's a new way of approaching this, and it's worth understanding how it's happening. The same thing will happen with Jim and Stacy and Robin's office. 25% of their cost is being allocated to the sewer fund. So it's not allocated there. We will be charging the sewer fund for the 25% of the cost of the staff in their office. Same thing will happen in city manager and city manager and financial administrator offices. I think we did. Do you remember the percentage, Carrie? I think it was 12 or 15%, maybe 12 and a half. I'm sorry, I don't have that one in my head, but we also did allocate a portion of the city manager and financial officers' salaries. And so those will be charged and the way we'll do that, mostly, is for Tom's staff who are paid hourly, when they do work for the water fund, for the water department, their pay stub or their paycheck will note that's where they did it, and that's how Stacy will keep track of how much we have to bill. So this is our estimate, that line you see in the budget that says, anybody remember what it's called? Where that inter-fund transfer, okay? When you see that line, that's what that is. It's the general fund charging the water fund or the sewer fund for those expenses.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Travis Bingham, Chief. I've been since 2020, the Chief's position, so working on 6 years. I've been here for a little while as an officer as well. I really like this slide. Like, I look at this, and Carrie pulled these off our Facebook page, but just some of the community engagement stuff that we do, the skate with the cop, this is the barbecue with the badge over here, and of course everybody's always dropping us off some goodies all the time, so a ton of support from the community for the department. We always appreciate that. Real quick, so we have 14 full-time officers. That includes myself, and when we say full-time, these are level 3 certified officers, so they've been through the full-time academy. There's level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 3 is the highest certification you can get for a police officer in the state of Vermont, with like basically 0 restrictions on what you can do. So we have 14. Even my role is mainly administrative, right? So yes, I'm in that number as 14, but it's most of my time is spent in the office doing all the administrative stuff that needs to be taken care of with 2 sergeants, and then we have a detective, SRO, K9 handler, and patrol guys. We have 2 part-time officers. They do not work a ton of shifts. They fill in when they can. Obviously, they have full-time jobs, but they're able to fill in some gaps here and there when we can. We have 5 full-time dispatchers. We have 1 supervisor position in that role that oversees kind of the operations part of the dispatch. And then we have 4 part-time. That number seems like it might be a little bit high, but again, they have full-time jobs. They don't work a ton of shifts all the time. They're trying to fill in the gaps when they can. It might be 10 hours a month here and there. It might be no hours for a few months. But anyways, I can answer all those questions that you have later on. Upcoming special projects, it's no secret, I had mentioned this publicly last March, that we are looking for some new space. We are certainly made the best of the space that we have here in the municipal building, but there's certain safety issues that, other concerns with everything that goes on here, so that's just something that we have been talking about. And then Rick kind of mentioned it a little bit, but trying to move away from purchasing vehicles on loan in the effort to hopefully not pay interest on vehicles that we have purchased. The revenue side of things, we are fortunate. Since I became chief, we were able to take over dispatching for essentially the entire county. We dispatch for 19 agencies. We are primarily the only police agencies. We do dispatch for the Sheriff's Department after hours, but that's a huge revenue source for us. We estimate in 2026 calendar year to bring in about $320,000 just for dispatch services, which does help offset the overall just under $2.7 million expense budget. Yeah, next slide. Yeah. I think this is, kind of paints the picture of where the money goes for the police department, right? Like 90% of it, which actually that's pretty good because I don't think I've ever done the actual number, and I always say about 90%, so pretty good there. 90% of it's salary and benefits, right? I can't necessarily control that. Everybody in my department, dispatchers and police officers included, are in a union. and they negotiate their contracts with the city council. So you'll see a very small portion. It's like, and I can explain that a little bit, 2.8% for equipment, right? Like we have a lot of gear, like in our cruisers that we have, like everything that we do with all the technology that we have. Fortunately, I can get a lot of that stuff through grants. Like we can't rely on grants all the time, but we've been very fortunate to offset some of the equipment costs with grants. And then under debt services as well, I do have some equipment that's in there that we will see in the later slide. Yeah, interesting number here, right? Like we should be about 50% right now, right, through the fiscal year. So you'll see that the revenue is well short of that 50%. And the reason being is I usually bill dispatch late spring. So usually wait till after the town meetings have happened, and then I send out the dispatch billing for about April 1st-ish, somewhere in that area. So that number will increase, and the other revenue, right? So like if you got $320,000, like how do we get up to the, I think it was 433. Another 100,000 is from the SRO and from our Special Investigations Unit detective. He gets about 30,000 a year for that. So we get pretty close to that. Excuse me. We get pretty close to that revenue number, and that will certainly change. So it's just kind of a timing thing. That's why it's off a little bit.
Kick on and then off. I was going to say, Kevin, we can really project, but the fan hasn't kicked on.
Hi, good morning, everyone. After having polished presentations by Mike and Tom and Travis, now you're going to have to listen to me for a second. So, my name is Kevin Lacoste. I've been on the fire department.
Can I just hold the mic up?
Oh, sorry. There you go. As you can tell, I'm not a public speaker, but I've been on the department for 24 years. Lived right here in the city all my life. So, I'm very excited about Newport and what's coming and what can happen here. Currently in Newport Fire, we have about 28 members. As you can see here, some of the events that we do. Oh, sorry. Gary took this off our Facebook page. We basically responded to 254, 55 calls this year in 2025. For a small department, that's a lot, I feel. We have one full-time employee. He's a paid fire administrator, firefighter, so he does a lot of the stuff that I'm trying to get away from a little bit. I'm paid part-time, full-time fire chief, I guess is the best way to put it. We have a great bunch of guys. They all have full-time jobs. They respond all hours of the night, early mornings, it doesn't matter, all kinds of weather. When people are having not such a great day, that's when we show up. Upcoming things at the station. The fire station was built in 1998. There are some things that will need to be addressed. Carter and Tom are in charge of MERC grants that are a MERC grant that's available. The station is going to try to take some advantage of that. We're looking for, at this time, we need dehumidifiers in the station. We get back from a call and the trucks are basically cold and wet and snowy, and the moisture inside the building is terrible. So we're trying to address some dehumidifiers. We're also looking at air handler scrubbers so that when the trucks are started, we can get rid of that toxic diesel fumes that are in the station. What was the other thing? We're kind of looking at the mini splits for like some heat, air conditioning inside the unit. And then there's some other small maintenance stuff, you know, window sills that need to be replaced, wooden sills, etc. We responded to 33 calls in Coventry this year. We do still cover a portion of Coventry Village. Really that's kind of our only income. They're charged a percentage of calls based on a 3-year average. So, and Gary and Rick are better at that than I am, but that's kind of the only income that we have. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of income. It's mostly outgo. I will say that, you know, you guys, the city of Newport has been super, super good to the fire department. We have some extraordinary equipment that we're able to respond to basically anything that happens, per se. I mean, but we are very, very fortunate. I appreciate that. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so this is, again, I guess we're kind of the smaller part of the whole total budget. The equipment, unfortunately, is super expensive, as Travis mentioned. It doesn't matter what you buy for the fire department. Grant money out there is a little bit thin. I mean, it's hard to get grants for different. There's so much competition out there with fire departments that it's really hard to get grant money. I wish we could do a little better at the incoming, but at this point, it's really tough. Yeah, and budget-wise, I mean, I guess we're about where we should be roughly.
Right, and the fine print is this includes the fire truck one that we have talked about so far. So if you're like, wow.
Yeah, it looks like it's, not good, but I'll be circulating around. Make sure you ask questions. We appreciate it. Anytime you guys are out and about and you see vehicles down there, stop in. We'd love to give you a tour at your station. We work for you, and we're happy to do so.
Thank you, Kevin.
That's it.
Last but certainly not least.
Okay, so I'll cover the operations department today since we don't have a city manager in place at the moment. I'll let you all know if you haven't been watching the city council meetings. Tuesday night next week, we have a special council meeting that we've called, the primary purpose of which is to meet with Dominic Cloud. Dominic is the consultant that we hired through Vermont League of Cities and Towns to run the city manager search. So this will be our first in-person meeting with him, much of which will actually be in executive session as he explains he'll explain the process to the community, and then we'll go into executive session. So Dominic will be helping us to kind of lay out that process, and then he tells us that if all goes well, we should be in a position to hire someone by the end of the fiscal year. That's our goal, is no later than the end of the fiscal year. So city operations, as I mentioned earlier, includes zoning, assessing, tax collection, utility collection, all the work that goes into keeping records for the city. It's done by Jim's office. And then the day-to-day management and the overall coordination of the entire staff is handled by the city manager. And in the past, Becky Therian was doing all of the financial management. Carrie stepped into that role in August. And Frank Cheney is covering now 3 things that have been combined into one position with this budget. They're all together, and those are zoning, assessing, and in the future, some questions around enforcement on assessing to make sure that we keep our unpaid tax and utilities as low as we possibly can. And then finally, we created a position before I became mayor. The council voted to create a position for grants administrator, and Frank has taken that on as a part of his work and done a very fine job with it. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So that's 6 full-time staff, 3 downstairs, 3 upstairs once we fill the city manager position. And this budget calls for 2 things that are changes that you should know about. One is that in Frank's area, we've asked for money to hire a part-time person to work with him on the assessment questions, because we can't keep up with all of what's necessary there. And the city, in my judgment, is leaving money on the table because we don't have enough staff. So that's a change you'll see in this budget. The other change is, in the past, we have budgeted, that's the one I was waiting for. In the past, we have budgeted, I think our most recent position was $95,000 for a city manager position. The advice we've gotten from Dominic Cloud and other mayors that I've spoken with is that that's not enough to attract the kind of talent we need for Newport's challenges. So this budget, thank you, Mike, this budget calls for raising from $95,000 to $100, I think we ended up at $125,000 base salary for that position. I'll just say a word about this. Being new to all of this, I think we are basically roughly mid-range, as I've done careful work to look at statistics that VLCT provides for similar jobs to what we have across the state. And I think we are, we may be a little low in some areas, but I think mostly we're kind of mid-range on what we're paying for our talent at this point. That's an enviable place to be. So I'm glad for that. And I think it's really important that we try to maintain it, because otherwise we know what happens. We start getting cherry-picked. Our best employees get picked up by other communities that are willing to pay more. So that 125 does represent a change. The other thing that we offer that makes us a really attractive employer is we offer a phenomenal benefits program, in my judgment. I thought I had like the best benefits I could have had when I worked for the National Presbyterian Church. This program puts that program to shame. We offer a lot more here. So we can talk more about that if folks have specific questions. Total expense breakdown, salary and benefits obviously make up 2/3 of that. Operations is mostly the cost of utilities in this building, and then, you know, it's more minor, but maintaining copiers, buying paper, all that kind of stuff. Anything you want to say, Carter? You've been in this with me, so. Okay, I think that's it. And so far, year to date, we're at about $420,000 on our expense side. We had budgeted for $976,000. There is a lot of adjusting that we are doing this year in our year to date. There are things that happened, you know, I'll just give one example from Public Works. Tom had us budgeting for, or planning for a well redevelopment. We have 2 wells, and instead we had to do 2 because the other one went out at about the same time. Did I characterize that correctly, Tom? I don't know where you went. Yeah, so there you go. That turned from a $65,000 project into a $130,000 project, roughly, right? So when that happens, then Tom and I work to figure out where else could we pick that back up in the water budget. That's a water thing, right? But same thing happens in the general operating budget. Another example would be we haven't hired, we budgeted for a half year of a city manager's salary this year. We aren't going to fill that until the end of the year. That gives us a little slack, but we've paid a lot of money to NEMRIC for Chip Stern's work with us, and that's where that's being picked up. So we're doing that kind of adjusting as we go, and it is our firm commitment that we are going to come in by the end of this year with a budget that is fully honest and fully in the black when we finish this year. Because a lot of what got us into the financial challenges we're facing has been budgeting that did not fully recognize all the related expenses. So that what I can commit to you is that the budget you're looking at today for next fiscal year, called fiscal year 27, but it starts in July of 26, we have done a lot of work to make sure that that budget fully accounts for every expense that we're looking at here. You were doing this. Okay, is that right? Or do you want Tom to do it?
Yeah, either of you guys.
Go ahead, bring it up. So Tom, jump in if you think there's something we should say here, but this gives you just an overview of what's going on in the water department. Salaries and benefits are only 20%. Operations runs 24%. I sign a lot of invoices for chemicals and that kind of stuff to run that sewer treatment, the wastewater treatment facility. There's a pretty significant equipment cost of 7.8%. This is things like Tom's constant harping on we need a new Vector truck because that's how we keep people safe in public works, water, and sewer work as they're digging in the city. And then look at this one, y'all. 35% of the budget for the coming year is going to be debt service, principal and interest payments in the water department. Last year, that would have been more like 15%. This year, this coming year, it has to incorporate the fact that we're working right now to work out the final details on taking a $2.6 million loan through the Vermont Bond Bank over 25 years. The voters approved that back in 2022. It's taken us this long to get the water tower constructed, and now we have to start paying the debt on that, and that's why that debt portion has skyrocketed over the last couple of months. For the next 25 years, debt, we're going to have to keep paying on that big loan, yes. Carter, yeah, there we go. And this is similar for the sewer department. Salaries and benefits, again, running about 22%. Operations, about 24%. Equipment, these are all running pretty similar, about 6%. Debt service is 15% there, up significantly from what we've been paying because we took and we proved a $1 million, but took an $870,000 loan in order to satisfy the accumulated deficit in the sewer department that was basically being borne by the general fund. So when we took that loan, that $870,000 was immediately transferred on the balance sheet to the general fund to satisfy that debt to the general fund. And we're going to be paying that for 10 years. And then capital reserve, again, paying that stuff out. Depreciation, I'll just say, I don't want to focus on this today, but the finance team is having a conversation, and we're waiting for Chip to get back from vacation, because our initial inclination is we don't believe we should be budgeting for depreciation. That when we're planning for the future, that happens in the capital reserve. And the depreciation is what you show on a balance sheet when things wear out. Every year you depreciate an asset that you have. So at the moment, I think that's a little misnomer in this budget, and we're going to sort that out over the next week or two. Okay, and then Frank. Where'd you go, Frank?
I don't usually need a microphone.
Yes, you do. Speak up.
Okay, so I'm here to address grant funding just briefly. Grant funding is a very integral part of how we finance and pay for capital improvements, capital equipment, and those projects that are outside of the normal operating issues that we face on a daily basis. And everybody, I get these questions on a constant basis, okay, where we have these projects and people believe that these grants are funding all of these projects, which is not accurate. There's a significant impact to both cash flow and the budget, okay, when you utilize grant funds to perform these capacities in the city, okay, and they are important. However, there's a cost associated with them. Cash flow. Most of these are cost reimbursement grants, which means as the city has to pay for the expenses as they come in. For example, on a project like the Causeway, it's been well over $1.1 million in expense in the last 12 months. All right, that all has had to come out of the city's cash flow, okay? And the reimbursement, there's sometimes a lag, so you have to carry that expense or cash flow hit on your books for quite some time. All right? And that is a consideration when you're trying to keep your line of credit expense down. Okay, when we talk about the budget effect, we talk a lot about these are match grants, and they are. However, that's not the critical factor. When we talk about a match grant, what we're talking about is you get a total award of $100,000, and along with that award, you get a requirement from the awardee of 10% or 50% of that amount in order to receive the full $100,000. However, the real important way to look at this is what is the total cost of the project, okay, versus the total award amount, which equals the city obligation. For example, and most of these have significant budgets over and above the grant funding. The water tower, for example, which ended up being, looks like it's going to come in well under budget, by the way, of $4.3 million. And you've got grant funding from two separate sources of $2.1 million. Okay, you still have a city obligation of $2.2 million. All right, so when, and many times those are financed. However, very often with the smaller projects, they're not. So that portion, okay, between the total cost of the grants and what is awarded, okay, is what the taxpayers have to come up with. Now, one of the issues that I think that's occurred over the last half decade or so is that this proportionate city obligation has not been consistently budgeted, and that has created a little bit of underfunding or deficit budgeting. That is not occurring this year. For the first time, I believe, okay, historically, we are going to budget. We have anticipated the amount in the 27 budget of expense and what revenue we should get back from those, derived from those expenses within that period of time. And although it's not an exact science, it's certainly predictable. Okay, and the bottom line is that you've heard a lot of discussion of you can't budget revenue on grants. Well, actually you can. Okay, because if you don't expend the expense, then you're not going to get the revenue, and it ends up being a wash. So this year, for those that have had a lot of questions, and I know there's some people in here but have questions about the grants, you will actually have a line item for each grant award that will have activity from July 1, 27 through 6/30/28 and corresponding revenue figures. Okay?
26 and 27.
Excuse me?
You said 27 and 28, but we're actually doing 26 and 27.
Excuse me. You will be able, and within those budget numbers, when the expenses are derived, they will be recorded in there, so you should be able to see the activity. In the past, these things have been kept on separate spreadsheets, okay, used for submissions. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at a later date.
Thank you. All right, so the most M&Ms estimated, but about 5% in some of our budget comes to paying our debt. I believe the most significant figures that stand out to me is this is not only what we're paying, but this is the interest and the cost to the city, at least in our projected budget, to have to pay for these lines of credit.
Next year.
For next year's, yeah, sorry, for this coming budget, this proposed budget that we were talking about. If you could do reverse math, you might notice, wait, that number doesn't create the 5% from that total budget. There's a couple things that aren't included, and that's because they're not part of a classic debt schedule. So those two things are the police department's taser lease and also a line of credit interest. So those things aren't technically fall into this category, but the line of credit interest carries at $20,000 or $75,000, about $25,000 a year. And yes, so this is again, I don't mean to be reiterating, but we're trying to move away from leasing or line of credit for vehicle purchases. And these two things up here are part of the fire department that they've spoken to, so.
And if I could just add to that, one thing that the council is considering and will take final action to recommend at the meeting on the 26th or the 28th, we're meeting both those nights, I'm not sure when we'll do it. But one thing you should know is that we are considering asking or warning that we will do quarterly payments on tax payments next year instead of twice a year payments. And the reason for that is because when you take in when you take in the money, then you've got to go 6 months before you get more cash infusion, and your expenses are still going up and up and up, and the only way to cover those expenses is to borrow off a line of credit, and we're paying interest on all of that money. So our goal is to actually even out the expense with the revenue throughout the year. So hopefully we have to borrow far less money, and that $25,000 interest expense that we're charging the city right now just for the line of credit to manage cash flow can be dramatically reduced. So we're working on that as a kind of an administrative fix to help resolve a significant expense to the city.
And as mentioned in the other pie charts for the water and sewer department, there were separate loans that were the tax anticipation note, bond line, Vermont Bond Bank. Those are not in this because this is just general fund. Talking turkey.
You want me to do this one?
Yeah.
Okay, so last year, I think this is our last slide, is that right, Karen? Okay, last year the voters approved that we would raise $5.7 million from the voters to cover the general fund expenses, to complete anything we weren't taking in other forms of income in the general fund expenses. We did that in 3 ways. And this was confusing enough that I had to go back and try and sort it out with help from Chip. The approval in March that the voters gave was for roughly $5.2 million. Then in August, we said to the voters, we made a mistake because we were double counting about $220,000 of income. I won't, unless you want to know, I'm not going to go to how, but basically we were taking it in through taxes and calling it income. It got diverted to the state and a portion came back, and we were calling that new income when in fact we had already accounted for it as income. And so we hadn't raised the taxes enough to cover that $220,000. So the voters gave us permission to adjust mid-year the tax rate. So that added $220,000 more to the $5.2 million that we got approval for in March. In addition to those two things, we also were given permission in March to borrow or to raise taxes for appropriations. There's a whole list when you go to the ballot of things that we support, starting with the library, which is by far the most expensive among them, but including a bunch of other things that we care about in this community together. Recycling was in there last year. It's back in the regular budget this year. Okay? So when we counted that all as part of last year's money we raised in taxes, and just so you know, Carrie has included the appropriations that we imagine the voters will support. We're guessing, based on history, what the voters are likely to support, and we have included those in this year's budget, so that we're comparing apples to apples, okay? So this year's draft that you have in front of you calls for raising $6.288 million, $6,288,000 to be raised by taxes, and then the balance to get us up to that almost $9.5 million is income from other sources. That represents a 10% increase over last year, a significant portion of which is due to debt incurred this year to manage accumulated deficit, and a significant portion of which, in my judgment, is due to finding errors in how we had been budgeting for several years, where we were under budgeting. I'll give you one example of this. Travis helped me with this one, where Travis discovered that we had been under budgeting on the cost of benefits in his department. So, and that's part of what helped to create that kind of deficit each year that we weren't aware of, we weren't catching it. So this year, part of what the increase is simply being honest about what the actual expenses are at the beginning of the year to ensure that we won't end the year in a deficit position. And then, of course, it also does include some cost of living increases. So this budget calls for a 3% cost of living adjustment for all staff, with I think 2 exceptions, which are where we had to raise the salaries. The council agreed in an executive session to give a larger increase to 2 people that are basically merit in order to get them into the ballpark of what the rest of the state is paying for comparable positions. But by and large, staff salaries have gone up 3% across the board in this. And we held, Jack Roberge helped us to hold the cost of healthcare benefits pretty minimal. I think it was only a 2.5% increase overall this year, which is much lower than I was expecting. But that's what makes up the 10% increase from last year's budget. And we'll finish with this statement. What we asked the department heads to do is to tell us the cheapest way they can continue to provide the same level of service that we have been providing. So if we want to make changes to this budget, we can do that, but it is likely to impact the services that we provide, and that's a decision that we make together as a community. Do we want all of what we enjoy in recreation? Do we want to pay fewer roads? Do we want a 24-hour PD? You know, those are the kinds of value judgments. And Carter and I, in our conversation with Kathleen Ramsey from VLCT, are trying to move us so that we begin this conversation earlier. So you can expect another town meeting in April or May where we start with the value questions. What do we want to see in our community? And that helps to drive the budgeting process going forward. And this year, we were too far into it to be able to start with that set of questions. But I just wanted you to understand what that 10% is about and what it would look like. Like, you know, if we said, okay, we're just gonna do a 10% across the board cut, we can do that. Really, I mean that when I say it. That's a choice that this community can make, and it's going to mean a reduction in service in some way in each of those departments. Or if we cut, you know, one department more than another, which we might want to do in the future. Anything else you want to add, Carter? Okay, then let's go back to the pie chart, please, early on, the big one for the expense. Can you run us back there? So now what I'd like you to do is I'm going to ask Mike to take advantage of the quiet, oh no, he went downstairs. Somebody who knows how to use their pencil over there is going to bump up the heat while you're quiet and working. So we'll turn the heat back on and let the blower run. You've got 10 minutes, unless you tell me you need more 10 minutes from now, to look at what we presented this morning take a piece of paper and a pen from your table and write out some questions that you have, or comments or ideas or thoughts that you would like to get into the conversation this morning. And then I'm going to let you know when we're done that period, and we'll have you talk with each other. But please don't start talking to each other now, because introverts need this space. Okay? So go ahead, and we'll turn the heat up a little bit while we're doing it. Let's do a 30-second stretch break. If you want, and if you are able, I invite you to stand in place and just reach high up toward the ceiling of this magnificent gymnasium. And maybe bend over as far as you can, touch your knees or your toes or as far as you can get. Patrick isn't even trying because he hurt his neck last week. Maybe reach out with your two hands, push out to the wall. Okay, and then take your seats again. Thank you. And one reminder Lori just asked me to make, which is really important, is that Esther and Darlene and Telsa, and Josie and Mike have worked to create. I went to them months ago and said, I want a town meeting like Lowell, Vermont has. And that means hot dogs and chips, and we all get to eat bad food together and have fun. So that's what we got downstairs at 12:30. And we encourage you to stay and just have conversation for another half hour or so if you want after the meeting's over at 12:30, okay? Carter, where'd you go?
Here.
Okay, why don't you start on this side of the room?
All right, just a quick reminder, I'm gonna send around, this is an optional sheet, because we don't know everything, but we will find the answer. And so the follow-up to those questions that remain unanswered, again, optional. I'm just gonna ask that we send it around so that people know.
So we'll sign it and then pass it from table to table. If you want to be on those emails
yes.
over the coming weeks or 2 weeks.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I was overshadowed by the coffee. Thank you.
Okay, so Carter is going to go table by table and take questions or comments. If you choose, let's just do that. And department heads, we may call on you to help answer questions.
All right. Good start was, what is the status of the tax collection?
Frank or Jim, one of you.
Yeah.
Jim?
The status of tax collection is we collected the first one. There's a few overdue payments, and the next payment won't be due until May 15th. Hopefully we've got enough money in the checking account to get us to there. That's where we are.
Well, and I can add to that.
Water and sewer payment in between. So.
At the end of last year, according to our audit, we were at about $630,000 in unpaid taxes. As of about a month ago, that number had dropped by more than 50%, right, Jim?
Yeah, it's down around 200,000.
So right now, there's $200,000 outstanding in unpaid taxes.
All right. Back to this table.
We were interested in whether Prouty Beach is covering its expenses. It was lumped in with everything else.
Right.
The answer is yes. If you look at the overall budget, I mean, because the way the rec department budget is separated is the expenses and income is by facility. So if you just take the Prouty Beach and look at the two, it's probably to the good by over $100,000. So it is covering its own expenses and more.
And then we were just wondering if perhaps when there is a city manager, just looking at, when you're looking at the operations budget and there was payroll and benefits, and then the next biggest thing was utilities.
Yes.
Like really negotiating that.
On the utility bills.
Utilities, and can we
Great question. And maybe, Carter, could you just say a word about MERP and what that is and what we're doing with that too?
So the MERP grant is about $500,000 that the city was allotted, and it stands for the Municipal Energy Resilience Program. And I honestly, this space is an excellent demonstration of how it's going to improve It basically addresses and tries to reduce operational costs by looking at your HVAC systems and also the envelope of your building. So like the fact that you can see sunlight through the bottom of that door, it's just bringing in cold air. Our ceiling, this is a beautiful vintage building, but it doesn't have the correct, the insulation is quite, louder? R value, thank you. The R value is very low. So anyways, it costs money to run those modine heaters more than necessary. So that's a way we're gonna try to reduce costs. But also I think what Eleanor is mentioning is like going back to our internet providers and phone lines and looking and scrutinizing that because, yeah, that adds up too. So it's just small monthly costs that are a little bit larger than they could be.
We just renegotiated all the phone contracts about a year ago. It was before I was elected mayor, but I was on council. And Dennis Boulogne, right? Dennis Boulogne, who does a lot of our kind of low-level tech work, does a lot of our tech work basically, had gone to all of our phone providers, looked at where they should be consolidated, and then basically demanded consistent rates across the board. And I think he saved us $15,000 this year. So that's one example.
I guess my name is Patrick, I live in Newport. One question is, when it comes to billing out dispatch services, are we comparable rates with other towns that charge neighboring municipalities for those services? And then my other question was, I'd like to learn more about how the city municipal building clerk's office is, where that 877 revenue comes from. I see some line items in the budget, but it doesn't add up to that. So I'd be curious to hear where the revenue of 877 comes from for municipal building.
Go ahead.
So for the dispatch question, it's a good question, Patrick. I've had it asked many times. We're probably on the lower end when it comes to dispatch fees. And part of that reason is based on how we bill it. There's a couple different ways you can do it. The structure that I have set up, and it's a little more complicated to explain without actually having something up on a screen where you can see it, but it's based on a 4-year rolling average of calls. And so essentially it's the entire dispatch budget dispersed over the agencies that are using those services. So whatever it is for the bottom line of the budget, our agency's included in there. We use most of the service ourselves, but obviously I'm not charging my own department to use those. And then it's dispersed out. So it's basically what percentage of the budget that agency is using based on the 4-year rolling average is what we come up with for a number. That's how we get there. Yeah.
So we can go more into detail if you have specific questions, but the broad answer to your question about that $877,000 of income in government operations, the biggie that you wouldn't think about that's in there is the intra-fund transfers. Right, so from water and sewer, I'm saying that correctly, right, Carrie? Yes. So that's where, when we talked about money being transferred in, that we're billing water or sewer for staff time and that kind of thing, that's included in there, as well as, when delinquent taxes are paid and there's a penalty, it goes in there, and grant income that's related to the city operation is in there as well. But I think the big one that I wasn't thinking of earlier is that one.
I don't know if this is the appropriate venue to ask this question, but it's coming from one of my 5th grade students who heard about this budget meeting and is very concerned about whether or not there is a line in the budget to increase wheelchair accessibility in the parks.
That's a very good question from your kids.
I will video your response if that's okay, so I can play it to them and make them feel as if
Well, I'm
they
going to
have
think of a
voice and
response.
choice.
I know that Public Works is working on in Gardner Park specifically. We're redoing the sidewalk. We redid the sidewalk near the playground, and we had handicap accessible area on the end near the playground. And I know the plan, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is to complete that all the way around with new sidewalk with handicap accessibility. We also, in the new playground, put the new wheelchair swing. We also have 2 new handicap accessible sandboxes that we're installing this summer too, to increase availability.
Here, say it again.
Mike also mentioned earlier that we put in the new cabin at the campground, which is handicap accessible. So we are trying to do our best. If there's issues out there that they feel, please reach out to us.
And everything going forward, we have that conversation. We build new facilities like the next cabin. When we built this last cabin, we have that conversation to build it handicap accessible. So thank you for that question.
Dave LaForce, own Built by Newport in Newport. This is it's not really a question, it's maybe a comment. I wonder if there's an easy way, because, you know, from the community, there's a lot of frustration with taxes going up, not only from the municipality, but obviously the state government. I just, you know, clearly, you know, a lot of the increase of the 10% this year is caused by 10 years of mismanagement and mistakes and yada, yada, yada. I just wonder if it would be a good educational piece to somehow, and I don't know if this is possible, claim what would have the increase been if these mistakes didn't happen to begin with. Because clearly the taxpayers in Newport haven't been paying the proper rates for 10 years. And maybe it doesn't matter, but it brings clarity. So it's just a comment. The other thing that I would say is, I also wonder, you mentioned that you want to do a similar forum in April and being proactive going forward. And I wonder if a piece of that should be some analysis on what are the other communities that are similar to Newport in the state of Vermont paying for municipal taxes, and how do we compare? Because I hear a lot of the community that Newport's the highest tax rate community in Orleans County. And that might lead us to, okay, if that's true, how can we fix that?
Thank you, Dave.
I had two questions. My name is Georgia. One is, how does the budget account for larger projects, like building a completely new building or doing a 100% renovation of a space? And I didn't know if anything like that was also connected to pit management and like that space being built.
So I'll take that. So people who know me know that I can't ever answer a question just quick and simple, right? Like I try to build it in my own head. One thing you should know is that there has been an effort made by our department heads for many, many years to plan for big capital expenditures. That's good practice. And for many years, the way they did that, thinking that it was working, is they put money aside in a series of what turned out to be almost 25 or 26 sinking funds. That's what they called them. We know we're gonna need, I'll use Tom's example that we all talk about all the time, a new Vector truck. It's gonna cost us probably $600,000. It's dangerous to keep running the old one and expensive, and eventually we're gonna need it. So Tom starts salting that money away in a sinking fund over time. The problem is that when we were budgeting for those sinking funds, if we got to the end of the year and there wasn't cash available, they didn't get fully funded. The sinking fund didn't get fully funded. And so one of the things we discovered last year when we started doing our deep dive, using again the Vector truck as an example, if all of the money that the voters had approved had been put aside in that sinking fund over the previous, whatever it was, 4 or 5 years, Tom, right? It should have added up to about $430,000, but there was only $160,000 in the fund. And then to make it worse, we were out of cash. So we were leaving money in 25 different bank accounts for a rainy day while we couldn't buy our groceries. It's like somebody saying, I'm saving for a new truck, but I can't afford to buy my groceries this week, right? So that was the analogy actually that Chip Stearns helped us with. And he basically said, you have to have your cash now. So the council took actions to consolidate all of that money into one account. We can still account for different things that are being saved for on our balance sheet, but we don't need 26 bank accounts to do it. So we consolidated it all, and then we took the money in order to pay the bills last June. That's how we finished the year solvent at the end of June. So what that does, to now get to the answer to your question, is it means that we have to rebuild our capital planning. We have to start from scratch effectively and say, okay, now how are we going to buy our Vector truck in 3 years? Or, put it off a year or two, see if we can get by, and start putting the money aside. So this capital budget includes, Chom, correct me if I'm wrong, $80,000 from general fund, 80 from water fund, and 80 from sewer fund to put aside for a Vector truck 3 years down the road that's going to cost us $600,000 to $700,000. That doesn't quite fully answer your question, because your question is really about super big capital expenses, like we need a new police department. Where's the, who knows how much money going to come from for that? And the answer to that is there are a variety of ways that communities do it. They can plan ahead, trying to salt money away, and if they're flush, they've got some money to go toward it. They could go looking for grants. They can go looking for low interest loans that are sometimes available to help with things. They can sell other assets they own in order to try and finance some new project like that. But at the end of the day, the only thing, there's one other thing they can do that we're talking about some, which would be, we are one of the few communities left in Vermont that doesn't have a local options tax. And that's basically a 1% tax that we share with the state on certain goods. And the city would have to vote on that. We can't just do that. We would have to vote and agree to do it. And then it's a way of sharing the burden, particularly with people who don't live here, right? Who are coming for things like hotel stays or, that kind of stuff. And that 1% money can be set aside for things like St. Albans building a new rec center with a pool was funded, I understand, largely through local options tax. So that's another way you can generate bigger chunks of cash. But at the end of the day, the only way to do it is to tax the voters, assume debt, take on the expense, and then tax the voters. And you said you had a second question, Georgia?
Yes. My next question is, for each of the departments, is there a budget for advertisement as a way of increasing community engagement and involvement and reaching more folks who are specifically not connected to Facebook, and utilizing more of Front Porch Forum or other models of connection to pull people from the community and let them know that these events are happening? So
that's a great question. Any department head want to? At the moment, we're operating basically 2 Facebook pages. Mike's got one for the rec department, Kevin's got one for the fire department. Oh, police has one too, right?
Yes. Yeah, brief answer. We have a little bit of money. We do most of our advertising on social media. We've got like 9,000 people that follow us on our Facebook page, and a lot of people, Newport Rock shares our stuff. So we have a broad reach, but we need to do better. We do, like, our big stuff we put in the newspaper, but there's always room for improvement. So that's what we do currently for advertising.
Yeah, so Newport Fire, obviously we do not have a budget for advertising, but we have the marquee out in front of the station that we try to post, upcoming events. Mike will post stuff for Newport Fire on the Causeway marquee. The Facebook page is great. I forget how many hits that we get there, but that's really popular. A lot of the stuff that we have is word of mouth. It really is. Our members are good about passing stuff on, and we try to do a lot of fire prevention stuff in Newport Rock. So yeah.
I did set aside money. I have, it's like $600, I think, for advertising, which is not a lot. And I can tell you a bulk of that money is spent on things like pens that might say Newport Police on them, that we will go to career fairs and stuff like that and give those out to people that come talk to us. We largely use our social media Facebook page. We have a very large following, and depending on what we're putting on there, it can reach up to 200,000 people sometimes, depending on what it is. But I hear you. That's a great question and observation of how we can, get in touch with those that maybe don't have social media. So.
Okay, I'll do it. Lori Grin, Newport. So just wondering, on the basis of things this is gonna sound weird, office supplies. Are we looking at, or do we have a program of consolidating purchase of our general office supplies, paper products, pens, pencils, copy paper, all that kind of stuff, under one budget so that we're not like running up to Walmart to buy a ream of paper or a pack of pencils? That's just one question. And that's really across the board for, like, is there a way to do that for everyone in the city to possibly save us money somewhere?
I think, or it is all consolidated in the budget presenting. It's on one line item for office supplies for all that covers the manager's office, my office, zoning, that type of thing. Yeah, I mean, I'm probably the biggest user of the paper and that type of stuff because we have to have it, we go through reams of it every day, so. But it's all purchased from the same place.
I'm giving Jim a run for his money. I think I personally killed at least 3 trees over the last 10 months. But trying to consolidate them in the budgeting is actually a first step toward trying to be more intentional about that.
Because I'm just thinking, you mentioned about the telephones, and if you're doing, copy machines and across the board, those types of things under, in one.
Yeah, we're trying to answer that question more effectively now, because you're right. Right now, we're operating 3 copy machines in this building, PD, clerk's office, and the one upstairs, and they're all separate contracts. So yeah, we should be moving in that direction.
And my next question might really be more water and sewer, but we are aware that the sewer plant is going to have a engineering study, as I understand it, sometime in the next 12 months. And where are we going with that? Because we know that there are major issues with that.
Well, first off, we really don't know if there's any major issues with the plant, but we are in a preliminary study. We are mandated by the state of Vermont every 20 years to take a hard look at the wastewater plant and see what upgrades or improvements we need to make that will carry us through the next 20 years. Actually, we just signed off on what the state calls a loan, but it's really a 0% interest grant for engineering services to either look at what's going to become a project, or we may be in great shape and we might not have to move forward with anything. But typically we will, and at this point we won't know for probably about a year what that might entail.
This is not a question, this is more of a thought. First of all, I realized I was really pleased to hear about paying our taxes quarterly instead of half year. Just a thought that I had was that, let's say the first quarter is due in July 1st, whatever the council decides. Is it possible to give a discount or some kind of incentive like a 1% or 2% discount just for that one quarter, and have all that, you might have people out there who would be willing to give that just for that small discount, and then the city has all that extra funds to work with?
It's a great question. We've asked it. When I get to sit at a table now of the 8 mayors in the state of Vermont. We meet once a month by Zoom. It's pulled together by Ted Brady and some of the staff at VLCT. And I asked the question, exactly that question, and they immediately said, boy, be careful going down that road. Like, it raises all kinds of other questions. So I don't know what those are. I'm not done trying to figure that out, because I think you're right. Having some kind of incentive built in to provide the cash to the city to operate is a healthy idea. But just so you know, the mayors all went, oh, be careful.
I had a couple of questions. I wanted to say first, thank you for working towards avoiding loans in the future as much as possible. Thank you very much for that. If I understood correctly, the fire department says it doesn't have as much income, but it does have expenses. And then with also, my question would apply to the students' request for better wheelchair access, perhaps in the parking. recreation areas. In cases like that, is there a mechanism provided now for citizens to make a contribution specifically for those kinds of things, so that it gets, we know it goes there and not for something else? And how do we go about it, or taking advantage of that mechanism?
Boy, that's a really great question, Claire. So I can answer in two ways. First, yes, we had an anonymous donation to help us cover the costs of the event today. So we can take those. There are ways that the police department takes in money like that, the fire department does. It's a little bit different because fire department has the association, so we're trying to make sure we try and distinguish between the two. But it is possible to donate to the city for a specific needed purpose. So just making a donation and saying, please do this with it, does not work, right? You have to make sure that it's among the city's stated priorities and work with the department head and the city manager to make sure that it's a good fit so that we don't end up with the tail wagging the dog. But yes, we can do that. But the broader question is really intriguing to me. I met this week with Dan Smith for the first time, who is the CEO of the Vermont Community Foundation. And I'm intending to meet with him. We're trying to schedule a meeting now for him to come to Newport to talk about how we can create better and more easily accessed opportunities for more significant giving, legacy kind of giving that can help the city to do things that it wants to do long term. So that's just a conversation we're just beginning right now, but it's absolutely on my mind.
Okay, so say immediately, if someone were interested, we could at least go to your office or Carrie, and they could figure out how to word it to the department head.
Yes, that's the way to do it. If you would like to consider making a donation, I think the way to do it right now until we have a city manager is to reach out to me or through Carrie, and then we'll talk together about whether it's a good fit for the city right now so that we don't end up trying to do something off budget and going off in a new direction.
Another question I had, I think you've addressed in part when you talk about planning, capital expense planning, but I'm more wondering for the long term, for instance, with water and sewer or streets, eventually, probably most of the underground infrastructure is going to have to be replaced, and I know it can't be done all at once. It's going to have to be done in chunks. I don't know how much grant or government help could be available for something like that. It's hard for me to get a grasp of how big an expense we might have to see in rate increases for a project that takes 1 or 2 years. And I know this is a very vague thing, and I don't mean to pick on water and sewer. It's just an example, because expenses for fire or police could come into that too. So anything you might give me about that would be appreciated.
Well, there are grants out there for specific stuff, and we certainly look for that. As I mentioned earlier, we are planning to rebuild Eastern Ave and Prospect Street. Fortunately for the city of Newport, since I've been with the city for over 30 years, we've taken our department and do projects that most communities do not. I may not find grant money, but I will budget for that project, and for the most part, it's covering just the materials. The labor, water and sewer is a little different, because if we are putting the labor there, it's certainly going to the water and sewer budget, not my public works budget, but we're installing or rebuilding roads, labor-free in a sense, and not contracting out projects. Yeah, we all love to see if we could get grant money to help along. We have through the years. But we are trying to actively replace our aging infrastructure to help benefit the city.
Thank you very much.
Use the mic.
I'm sorry, you're right. Kevin raised the issue of the fact that, let's see, it takes $32,000 to lower our tax rate by a penny. So that's what we need to do if we want to look at a reduction in this budget. And he was mentioning that salaries are the largest part, we've said, of many of the budgets that we're dealing with. We talked about how to possibly reduce the amount of salary we're paying for it. And one way was to reduce the number of employees that we had. We thought about whether or not how that would happen. And one way it could happen is by attrition. So it wouldn't be that we'd fire anybody or lay anybody off, but when somebody wanted to leave, we might not replace them. And whether or not that would reduce services, one of us suggested that sometimes we see and we hear people complain about, hey, there's 8 guys out there around a project and only one of them's working in the hole. And you know, maybe we have too many people in certain divisions, or that we could incentivize people who are at the top end of the salary range, but because they've been there a long time, and maybe they've only got 2 years to go until they can retire and get onto Medicare. Maybe we could incentivize them to leave by promising them that we would pay their health insurance for the 2 years that they'd be worried about not having health insurance. So these are some ideas to reduce salary.
So I think I'm going to take that mostly as suggestions for critical thinking, but I also want to mention that just in the time that I've been on council in the last 2 years, we've done that exact thing. We effectively cut a position that was shared between Rec and Public Works. Travis had an unfilled position that we made a decision not to fill this year. It was included in this year's budget because we knew we were so tight. And next year's budget, we have not budgeted for it there as well. So yes, we're watching for those opportunities. And I'll just mention that the danger in that is to be careful. You know, I've had a long conversation with Travis about this. There's cascading impact. If you cut a position here, it has potential to impact a lot of other things that go around it, and certainly can impact things like overtime pay, right? So if you end up having to cover those hours anyway, you're actually paying more for them than if you had contracted in the first place. But none of that is to say that we shouldn't be looking at those opportunities. I think that's an absolutely valid point. And then I'm watching the clock, so I'm thinking we do one more round, and this should include, I think we'll do less answer and more, if you have something you want us to be thinking about, in particular, over the next 2 weeks as the staff comes back with a final budget for the council's consideration, please say so now, and if you don't get to fully speak your mind, please come speak to me or a department head, or actually just write it down. Carter, get it to the finance team. There are myriad ways you can get your concerns to us so that we can take them seriously in the next week. So Ann, will you start, please?
I have one question then that I would like to point out.
Use the mic, please.
My one concern is we know that as individuals, sometimes instead of being able to buy a car cash, we have to take a loan, and it's better to, we know we're going to have to pay interest on it, but just for our budget, it's better to have to pay it out over a period of time. So, for instance, in water and sewer, $250,000 is going into the capital funds of water and sewer this year, for next year.
And instead of doing that, and anywhere else in the budget that you're capitalizing, you could think about taking a loan. Yes, we may have to pay interest, but it will cost less. This budget can be reduced by, a fifth of what, let's say, the amount of capitalization you're going to spend if you take it over a 5-year period. And this may not be the year for us to capitalize all of these expenses that you intend to do, because they really have a big hit on the budget.
Yes, thank you. That's a helpful thought. Okay, and anything else you want to add? And as we circulate quickly one more round here, we're just going to start and go back around the room one time.
The other thing I'd like to mention is dispatch.
Hold the mic up close, please.
I'd like to mention dispatch. The thought, as I recall many years ago, was that as we added other groups who would want to use our dispatch, we would eventually reach a point where it would pay for itself, whatever we meant by that. The dispatch that is in the income that you mentioned was $320,000 this year that we're bringing in from other people using our dispatch, other groups. Because you have amalgamated all the expenses of police, there's not a separate dispatch expense. But the prior year, from our annual report, the dispatch expense was about $500,000. And I was just wondering whether or not more of that expense could be put on the shoulders of the others. For instance, do we charge them for the plant? In other words, do we charge them for the rent that any other service would have to pay to use the building?
Right.
Et cetera.
So I'm going to hold that just as a question and ask Travis to note it without trying to answer it today, because I'm watching the clock. But we will talk about that more as a staff and come back to be able to talk about it in council meeting as well. Thank you, Ann.
Were there thoughts? Did you want to bring up your thought or consideration around?
Hi, Valerie, Newport. One of the ones, we've talked about it a little bit here, but thanks to everybody for kind of really paying attention to the budget. But going forward, what about our strategic plan into being involved with it and hazard planning?
Hazard planning, is that what you said? Very good questions. One of the things I think should be high on a new city manager's list is to look at both a long-term strategic plan and a hazard mitigation plan, and an emergency plan. And one other piece around planning that you should know we're in a conversation about is capitalization strategic planning, or finance strategic planning. We're actually in a conversation right now about a relatively inexpensive contract with a company that would help us to look at whether or not we are fully considering all the income sources that we could consider for some of the long-term strategic planning.
Robert Perry. I just want to thank all the heads for all the work that they're doing. Yeah. And my only question is, the city police department is looking to move. Are they looking into a unused open building right now, or are we looking at building a new place, new facility?
I just take that second, Travis. We have only a handshake agreement on the Armory building that they won't sell it without coming to have a conversation with us first. And we have not yet started, though Travis and I have been talking about trying to get this conversation off the ground this spring about the feasibility of such a potential move. So that's the only thing that, Travis, unless you know something I don't, that's the only thing that we've actually kind of put on the table so far.
I just wanted to add to that question. If it is the Army that we do end up getting, do we have an idea yet how that will affect the current program at the high school that currently goes there and it's JRTC?
Yeah, we haven't gotten deep enough, although that's certainly been a part of our conversation. We're aware that, the high school is also in significant flux right now in their own strategic planning. So I've had a conversation myself with Chris Young and a couple of members of the board at the school to talk about what the implications would be if we were trying to move in that direction.
Hi, Susie Small, Newport.
Put the mic right up close.
Question about the mechanism currently in the absence of a city manager. Is there a mechanism in place to currently measure wants versus needs in this budget?
That's a great question. Is there a mechanism in place for us to try and measure wants versus needs? I think all I can tell you is that we have done a far deeper, more careful dive into budgeting as a group, the department heads and Carrie and myself and even council to some extent this year than has been done in recent years. And the overriding question that we have settled on is, what's the least amount of money we can spend and still offer the current level of service? That's all we've done so far. If we decide together as a community that we need to do something more drastic this coming year in the short term, we're going to have to talk about how that would be experienced across the departments. And in addition to whether or not we do that, the whole point of this next round of budget for the following fiscal year that we would begin late this spring is to actually get to the community answer to the question wants versus needs and begin to have values conversations about what we all think we want from our community services. Yeah.
I wanted to know more about our police department and how it decides how many staff it needs to have. Is there a formula that all police departments use? And compared our size of our town to other sizes of towns in Vermont, or maybe even in other states or nearby states, about the level of coverage, and what does it mean when we have that extra thing that we offer of 24-hour that all towns don't have. Are there other comparable sized towns that do that? And where do we come in those understandings?
So Travis, can we just agree that we'll try and come back with some more thoughtful analysis of that? Is that okay? Great. Anybody else? Final comments, Patrick?
Susie had mentioned something about like wants versus needs, and there are other policies elsewhere that I've lived that allow a city to, I don't want to necessarily use the term trim the fat, but not provide as many services that draw down budgets. And one that I think of is the streets department. Like many cities don't plow the sidewalk. The landowner with the sidewalk frontage is responsible for that service. So not saying I advocate for taking that old John Deere tractor off of the sidewalks, but those are some of the questions that people need to start thinking, like, am I willing to shovel my sidewalk so that my taxes go down, kind of thing, or don't go up? So,
yeah, good questions. Final comments? We've still got a minute or two.
So I'll knock these out, Reddenberg. A couple of quick questions.
A little closer to the mic.
A couple of quick questions. Smoothing the billing for dispatch services. It sounds like that's done annually. Could we do something that's more semi-annual or quarterly, kind of like we do other places?
So the Newport ambulance is probably the biggest service that we provide for, and they're billed quarterly. The sheriff's department's billed quarterly, and Orleans ambulance is quarterly. All the other ones are like less than $3,000, so they don't want quarterly bills. They just want to pay it once. That's it.
Awesome. And then, really, is there a plan to kind of modernize our high school? And you alluded to something. You were having those conversations. And I was just kind of wondering about that, because that's a big part of the community.
Yeah, I'll just say, I'm really glad I'm not the one trying to figure out what to do next at the high school. It's a big, fat, hairy challenge. And it's impacted not only by the question of contamination and what they have to do to mitigate that over the long term, which is dramatic and huge for them. It's also a problem of kind of what the current flux is at the state level around what education consolidation may or may not look like. So I don't think the city has a role in the short term in that conversation. Having said that, they have gone out of their way. They've already come this fall to make a presentation to City Council about kind of the things that they are thinking about. So we're trying to keep those lines of communication open without taking responsibility or overstepping our bounds. I think Ann had one more comment.
Yes, I just noticed one large increase, and I wanted to have an explanation for it. In Public Works, the total salaries on line 524 increased from 2026 budget from 647,000 to, in the budget we're proposing, 855,900, I believe, dollars. So there's a big increase of about $202 there.
Yeah, that's an easy one to answer. I'm glad you brought it up, Ann. It's entirely attributable to the change that we've made in those interfund transfers, right? So in the past, Tom's salary would have been divided in 3 places. Now it's all in Public Works in the general fund. And there are 3 other staff people he has who are similar, okay? So that's why that jumped. And the way you can't quite see it unless you know to look for it, the way that's coming back into the general fund is in that interfund transfer. Okay, I can't tell you how it makes my heart just burst with people actually asking really thoughtful questions. We have so much work to do now, immediately, to get the council to a budget that we want to recommend to the voters, but also over the coming year. I hope this is the first of many, many conversations we will have that more clearly involve the community, especially in those value level conversations. What is it that's important to us? And I'm going to give you just a 5-minute stand up and stretch, use the bathroom, or refresh your coffee break. But please don't leave, because Lyle is here to help us talk about long-term strategies that will help to solve some of these challenges. And that's the whole point. So I hope you'll stay for that. And I want to introduce one more person who's come in. Stephanie Clark, in the back by the door there, is the person who we have been working closely with for the last year through White & Burke. She works for White & Burke Real Estate, and they are experts in, I used to say TIF, tax increment financing, but now also CHIP, which is Community Housing Infrastructure Program. And they're the ones who are helping us to try and figure out whether or not long-term financial strategies like that are even feasible in Newport. So Stephanie is not kind of our lead presenter, Lyle is, but she's here to answer specific questions, and she has agreed to stay through lunch. And Ann, at least, has said that she would like to sit with Stephanie and ask some really specific questions about some of the challenges around TIF. And look for their table downstairs. If you would like to be a part of that conversation, pull up a chair and be a part of it. Right, Stephanie? Okay, so 5 minutes, and then we're going to give the mic to Lyle. So just a quick stretch break. Okay. So I've already introduced Lyle Jepson. I'm so thrilled that he was willing to make the trip up today. I think he's got a unique perspective across the state, and he knows Newport, which meets all my criteria. So would you please give a warm welcome to Lyle Jepson, Commissioner of the Department of Economic Development. I can give you a mic stand. I don't know. That's Carter. Yeah, okay. And do you want the mic stand?
All right, thank you very much for staying. I know I am the only thing between you and lunch, and that's not always a great position to be in. I want to start out by saying that what is happening today does not necessarily happen in all communities. You have a level of transparency here that I haven't seen in a lot of different places. So I think you need to give a round of applause to the staff that are doing that for you. So thank you for doing that. I want to also commend you for supporting your police department, your fire department, your public works, your rec department, because that always doesn't happen at the same level that you are supporting them here. And that makes a huge difference, especially when people want to move into a new city or a new town. They look at the school, they look at the rec department, they look at the police force, they look at all of that, and it makes a huge difference. Why I say that is, I'm now in this new role, so don't ask me tough questions. I'm the Commissioner of Economic Development for the state, whatever that means. I was in an RDC role, which is like Dave Schnedeker, who I think his office is in St. Jay or someplace, yeah. And my role was connecting the dots. And so I think that that is what I'm currently doing right now at the state. But what I wanted to kick off with, and I'm going to rewind the tape in a minute and really introduce myself, but I wanted to start with a couple comments from what I've just heard you all talking about. And that includes that you don't like surprises. Nobody likes surprises. You have had a level of surprises that other towns have not had. You are taking up the challenge and you are fixing those problems. I congratulate you for that. And you are fortunate to have the people that are working really hard on that, like Rick. And I'm going to say at the start that you don't have necessarily a spending problem. When I'm looking at all of the different things, and you're pointing out some really good areas to look at, but you don't have a spending problem. You have a revenue problem. You need more money. And that's one of the things that I'm going to just talk about, and I'm not going to take a long time to do that, but I want to talk a little bit about that TIF thing that Rick talked about, tax increment financing. I'm sorry that it has the word tax in it, because it's really an anti-tax. It's a way to bring in revenue, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. I would suggest that this really is Newport's moment. You are on a different trajectory. You have gone through some things that were difficult, and you're digging your way out of that. There were a couple notes here I want to make sure that I said before I jumped into what was on the screen. An unofficial comment from the governor, who I work for. We had a meeting the other day about Newport. Actually, it was on Thursday that we met. I don't know that we told you that. Okay, I can't tell you that. And you're recording this, thank you very much. Is that public TV? Is it public TV?
It's going everywhere to the national and international.
Okay, so I'll be careful. All right. So the issue that you are going through here in Newport has been raised to the level of the governor. He has a very strong desire to support Newport. We know that there were problems that happened in the past that still are affecting you day to day. You drive by it twice a day if you're going to work or not with the pit across the street. You did not create that. People came in and said, wouldn't this be a cool idea to do all this stuff? Everybody stood up and said, yeah, this is a cool idea. We're going to do all this stuff. Well then, all the stuff didn't happen. And so now there's some residual from that. And the governor's aware of that. So, now I'm going to go to my official, and I want to thank Stephanie for putting together this wonderful presentation that I had a couple pictures I had nothing to do with, and you'll know which one in particular that disturbs me the most. That one. Yes, I did graduate with Sharon from North Country Union High School. Check out the hair, okay? Yeah. Okay. So my father was at Chittenden Bank. He was then Chittenden, then it went to Peoples, now it's M&T. It'll be something else someday, just be patient. And he was the manager at the branch there. My mother worked at the elementary school with Sharon. She was a speech and language pathologist support person. And we lived right on Sloan Street here in Newport. My sister graduated from North Country, and then both of us went on to UVM. I never left Vermont, and I'm excited to be back here with you. I'm going to get off that picture because I think it was in a yearbook. I think an old girlfriend is like right there, so we'll just move away from that. I want to tell you a story and why this is so similar to where I live right now. I live in Rutland, and in Rutland, we had some things going on years ago that was not so great. We have a pit too, But that pit was created 52 years ago when there was a fire. That pit, nothing happened to it. The pit became a parking lot. It started to grow trees. You're seeing the same thing here. We also had issues with drugs. We also had issues with what were called the Los Solitos gang. This was back in the late 90s. A major newspaper picked up the fact that there was issues with heroin in Rutland, and you can see the picture there, which stuck, which was, the state of Vermont, pure heroin coming right out of a tree. We became Rut Vegas. This was the pit down in the corner, and that, of course, was the fire. Some things happened. A young lady in 2012 got hit by a person that was huffing. He was driving and huffing, whatever you do to do that. I don't know all the technicality, but he was wasted, obviously, and ran over her. The community stood up and said, enough, we are done. And so they started to create some things, and they created Project Vision, similar to what's going on here in Newport, where you have created a strategy. You now have a mission, and you're going to change your community. We even went out and we started to call ourselves Real Rutland, that we are real people, and we want other people to come and join us in Real Rutland and join our community. We strengthened the police force. If you do not have a strong police force, your community is in trouble. So thank you for supporting your police force. In Rutland City, they're 30 plus strong now, and that is making a huge difference. And it's not to arrest people, it's to just be present and to be there, to be in the schools, and that's happening. So we did a lot of stuff in Rutland to change things. One of which was TIF, this tax increment financing thing. It's a revenue generator. It brings in money, and we're going to talk briefly about that. That is the diagram of the new hotel that's going to go in the pit. It would not have happened had we not hired in Rutland City Stephanie Burke and White and Burke, or Stephanie Clark, sorry. Can I call you anything? Just whatever I make up as I go along? Okay. That is going to be the new hotel. 7 stories, restaurant in the bottom part, a restaurant. They're calling it a tiki bar at the very top. It'll be 27 units of housing, 99 units of hotel. The community, once we went out and told them how this was going to work, that in fact, we were going to solve a problem for them, which was the pipes, the water lines in Rutland City were 150 years old. There were some sewer lines that were made of wood. And they either were going to have to tax the public to change those, or they needed to figure out a way to increase the grand list so that the grand list would pay for that. That's what TIF is. So the community, we just said, would you please vote for this? Because it's going to give you new water pipes, it's going to give you new sewer lines, it's going to give you a hotel, because the hotel couldn't come in without capacity that the new water lines would create. 85% of the people that went to the polls voted yes for a bond that they needed to put money up front that will be now paid off over a series of years by what's generated from taxes from the hotel. And it's a whole process. Stephanie can explain that whole process because it's complicated. But at the end of the day, it's a revenue generator. Pictures of Newport. Pictures of the pit. It's time. You have similar issues. We were a railroad town in Rutland, just like we were a railroad town in Newport. Blue collar, Rutland, blue collar, hard workers, Newport. Similar communities, size difference. You know, we have a 30-member police force, you have 14 plus 2 part-time. Very similar communities. You now have the Newport Initiative. That was the real Rutland. You now have the Newport Initiative. You have a strategy that you're putting together. And that strategy could have a lot to do with this TIF. You will need, the city council will have to approve a TIF, and then you would need to approve a bond someday as part of a project, say, to clean up that pit and do something over there. More to come on that. And here are pictures of your community that, quite frankly, Newport, our community, is beautiful. You have the outdoor quality of life that people are looking for. They will move here. But yes, you need housing. Could there be housing across the street in the pit? Could, and I'll get it all wrong now, JJ Newberry's, is that what that was up the street? Could that be housing or something else downtown? Used to be the dollar store over here. It was Fideli's back in my day. We went to get all of our meat at Fideli's. What could that be? There's talk about the state office building maybe not being a state office building anymore, but could that be a hotel? Imagine this, on a waterfront. And could the state office building be someplace where the state office people don't care where their office really is? They're getting a great view right now. But I think you'd rather have people coming in to a hotel down the street where maybe you've got that 1% tax that anybody coming to that hotel is paying that is going to help pay off some other things that you want, like a fire truck. That now costs more than $1 million, a fire truck, which
was just under.
It's insane how much it costs, but it is what it is. And I don't know if you're anything like me, but my taxes never go down, ever. But what a TIF does is it keeps them a little more steady. And what a TIF does is it increases your grand list, which allows you to spread costs out more. I went backwards. What you're doing is exactly what other communities who have secured a TIF have done. St. Albans, Killington, Rutland, White River Junction, there can only be a certain number of TIFs. So if you want one to bring in revenue, and I'm going to keep saying to bring in revenue, if you want a TIF, you're going to need to get in line really quick. Because the state can only have a certain number of them legislatively. I think there's only 4 more that can be given out in the state of Vermont. Correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie. Something like that. I'm making this up now. No, there are 4 more. And you can only have 2 per county, so Rutland County has their 2 with Killington and Rutland. So you could be 1 in Orleans County. But what's happening right now is your council and your mayor are putting together a group to work on this. Your mayor was in Montpelier Wednesday, pulling all these people together to say, hey, where do we get more revenue for my city? One of those ways is TIF. So, Stephanie is way smarter than I am when it comes to everything. This is how the money goes. Correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie. You need a private developer. You need a plot of land. You have a plot of land. He's working on how to buy it so that you can so that somebody else doesn't get it, so that you can do something there that looks like what you want your downtown to look like. And I would suggest maybe 4 stories, maybe 3 stories of that's housing, maybe something on the ground floor is commercial. Bring people downtown, they go to the restaurants, they pay your 1% tax, which you have to all vote on to get that 1% tax. That additional money, because there's additional money that will come onto your grand list, a lot of that used to go to the education fund. So let's pretend that that plot across the street is worth $100,000, and that's what you're getting taxes on. You then develop that, and now it's worth $10 million. I'm just making that figure up. There's an increase in the taxes that that property is going to pay, obviously. Without a TIF, a lot of that money goes to the education fund or to the state. But what a TIF allows you to do is instead of sending that new money that wasn't there before, so people say, you're stealing from the education fund. Well, you can't steal something that wasn't there because it wasn't there. But what you are allowed to do with a TIF is you take that money and pay off infrastructure costs. And you're going to say, well, what infrastructure? I heard you talking about wastewater. I heard you talking about the sewer plant. I heard you talking about water lines. I heard you talking about streets and sidewalks, and you didn't talk about lampposts, but I did. That's the type of stuff that a TIF would pay for, that normally your property taxes would pay for. And for a period of time, until your bond is paid off, now there's a whole lot of different things that go into that, until that bond is paid off, you get to retain what's called increment, or that additional money that $10 million across the street got in taxes. You get to keep that. And there's a percentage you get to keep, and some goes someplace else, but that doesn't matter. You keep most of it. You just paid for your water lines, your sewer lines, your new streets that are supporting those projects. Because there is a term that Stephanie will tell us to use, which is but for. But for this TIF, that project wouldn't happen. Well, I will tell you, but for the TIF, it won't happen. Because it's too costly for developers to build anything anymore. When you hear people say it costs $500,000 to build one apartment unit, why is that? Why is that? I don't know. Prices are amazingly high. A lot of it has to do with infrastructure. If you can go to a developer and say, we've got a way to pay for the infrastructure so you don't have to pay for the water lines, the sewer, all the stuff that's going to go into, not necessarily into the project, but get the project to a point where it can be built, they just saved a lot of money. Because in the past, that developer would have to pay for that, access to the sewer and the water lines. The TIF pays for that. Some people will say, well, that's corporate welfare and you're just paying a developer and he's going to be able to do it anyway. Had that been the case, that pit wouldn't be there right now. Had that been the case, the pit in Rutland wouldn't have been the pit in Rutland for 52 years. Because developers aren't going to pay that. What they get back is not going to come back in time for them to really have an investment and make it work for them. So, that's a chart that I'm not going to describe to you. We're just going to go on. Because what that showed, oh heck, I'll try. This is what your pit generates, and that's not the right figure, but this is what your pit might generate right now in tax revenue. It's not helping you one bit. You get a TIF, and somebody develops on that property. This is now what that is the taxable on that property. This new amount that wasn't there before, so it's not stealing from the education fund. This that wasn't there before, you get to keep the majority of it, like 80%. Stephanie will correct me. You then get to use that money to pay for your water line, your sewer line, your upgrade to your sewer system that you would have had to pay for anyway as a taxpayer, because eventually you're going to have to do it. Now's your time. So this just talks about payment periods and blah, blah, blah. This shows that money again. You don't care, because I just told you about it. What needs to happen is the city council needs to work with White and Burke to put all their ducks in a row, go before what's called the VEPC Council. You don't care what that stands for. They would approve your TIF because they have never gone before the VEPC Council and not had a TIF approved. And then the city's going to come back to you, the mayor's going to come back to you and say, I'm just making this figure up, don't fall out of your chair. I need a $2 million bond. Rutland went for 3.8, something like that, which was approved by the city voters by 85%. You'll go to the city voters for a $2 million bond to upgrade the water sewer plant to make sure everything's the way we want it to be. You'll approve that by vote. You are in absolute control of yes or no. And then that $2 million bond will be paid off by the increment of the development that happens across the street. as an example. So, there's another program called CHIP. All that is, a TIF district is much bigger. You could put J.J. Newberry's, you could put the dollar store, you could put the state office building, you could put the pit across the street into this big area that's called a TIF district, and you would have 10 years to do all these projects. A CHIP is just a small project. It's just, you might say, we're only gonna do J.J. Newberry. And CHIP is just for housing. So you would have to do just housing. TIF, you can do other stuff. You can do commercial, you can do whatever. I encourage you to go for a TIF. CHIP is just rolling out, not a bad thing. Both are part of my department at the economic development at the state. So way more information than you wanted. I would suggest to you, based on the people that I have met over the last 3 months, this is your moment. This is a moment where you can say, we control our destiny. You're getting your books lined up. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You now know where you stand. You've got a couple loans out there, but I will tell you, the amount that you have out in loans right now is not as much as most communities have. That's not where you want to be necessarily, because I don't like paying interest either. And I'm a fiscal conservative. I'm so conservative that I borrowed my 92-year-old mother's car today to drive up here because she gets 36 miles to the gallon, and my Tundra does not. It is kind of funny to see a 92-year-old, 90-pound woman behind the seat of a Tundra. She can't see over the steering wheel, actually. So I'm going to leave it at that. I know you're going to have lots of questions. This is just the beginning of a conversation about what is TIF and how can you bring in more revenue into your budget. Because I will say again, I don't think you have a spending problem. You have a revenue problem. This is a tool that you can use and that others are using. Get in line real quick. I think it's something that will benefit Newport. And I have a love for Newport. It's all yours.
Thank you. So don't go anywhere. Yeah, thank you. So Stephanie, if there are questions that are raised that you think you've got the right answer for, feel free to jump in. And we're just going to pass the mic again. I'll pass it this time. If you've got a question or a comment, all I ask is that you use the opportunity to speak with these folks to ask questions. And that can include, I have a fear that, so my question is, right? But please don't use it for speechifying. Make your point so we can move on and get as many questions covered as possible. And then remember that you can go downstairs and sit with Stephanie at lunchtime. Who would like to start us out? Patrick.
Hi, Lyle. Thank you. And Stephanie. So I'm sure like 60 people in this room or maybe more have the same question. What would the city be able to do or should do to, other than like a performance bond, to prevent a developer from going under or economic downturn, from pulling the rug out from under this type of project? So what mechanisms would you recommend?
That is called a development agreement, and I will turn it over to Stephanie Clark because that's a hard question.
Yeah, you can call me anything. I've been called everything. So, yes, a development agreement. And so thank you for bringing that up, because that's one of the first questions anyone asks, and it's the most important question, honestly, because you have to have security. What differentiates Vermont TIFs from everywhere else in the country is the amount of oversight and the amount of lockstep that we do this. And what I mean by that is it's not an if you build it, they will come type of TIF. That did happen out west. They did that a lot in the Midwest, where they would run a sewer line out to like an interchange in the hopes that they'd get a Uno and Lowe's and Walmart, and it never came. And now they're on the hook for that sewer line. In Vermont, we have a development agreement. You have to have a signed development agreement before you ever get approval by that agency he mentioned, VEPSI, and before you can go to your voters. So that's your opportunity to say, to poke holes, like that development agreement gets approved by the city council and it gets negotiated that says, and there's the most important
technical piece of that entire document is called the minimum taxable value. And what that means is there is a floor to what a developer must pay on the property. We calculate that to make sure it covers our debt service, our payments. And if their property either doesn't get developed, or it's slower, or it's developed less than we thought it would, too bad. They have to pay the exact taxes we said at a minimum. Most of the time it's so low, they go way above it, and they end up paying more taxes than they anticipated, than we all needed. And that revenue goes into the TIF fund, which helps pay for other TIF improvements. But at a minimum, they have to pay it. So it happens in every district. So St. Albans, the hotel that was done, you know, if they didn't build that hotel to the degree they said they would, and it wasn't an $8 million value afterwards, too bad, you have to pay the taxes on $8 million.
Sure. Can I just add to that one thing? Thank you. So the next question might be, well, what if the company goes out of business? And so what? That's why you vet the company. The company that's building the hotel in Rutland has assets well in excess of what they would need if they didn't build the hotel. So there is a level of guarantee. Now, could the world blow up? Yeah, the world could blow up, and then who's going to be on the hook? The municipality. But you vet that developer, and then you don't have to really cross your fingers, because they have deep, I won't say deep pockets, they have enough money to cover it if there was a problem. Same thing with Killington. They're working with Great Gulf, which is a huge corporation. If they don't build, now that Killington's putting in this huge water system, they're taking water from one side of the mountain, bringing it up a mountain and down. If Great Gulf doesn't build, Great Gulf still owes them what they said they're going to pay them. And Great Gulf has pretty deep pockets. So vet your developer is what you need to do.
And it runs with the land. The agreement runs with the land. So even if a developer goes bankrupt, it runs with the land, it goes to tax sale, that next buyer is on the hook, and that's part of the deal. Now, what he said is that the municipality is on the hook. It is a general obligation bond, and we never say otherwise, because you have to have eyes wide open. But again, the type of work that needs to be done to be able to take things to the next level is there has to be some shared risk. This is a public-private partnership, and public-private partnerships is that everyone's in this together, but it's very heavily mitigated risk.
Go ahead, Susie.
Who pays the debt service initially on the bond?
In a TIF, it's the municipality. It's a municipal project because it's municipally owned infrastructure. So you own it, and then you're paying the debt service on it. If it's a CHIP, I just want to differentiate, because it's possible to have a CHIP project and then a TIF district, and that's very well maybe what happens in Newport. It's going to happen in other parts of the state, and a CHIP can be held, that debt can be held by either the municipality or the private owner.
How does that not impact taxes?
Because anything that's created new, that's generating new taxes, is what pays down that debt service, nothing else. So once they show up, you might be asking about short term. There is always a short-term lag, and so yes, in the interim, there is short-term debt service, and there's always a cash flow deficit that can be managed in 3 ways. This is getting very nerdy for a Saturday at noon, but I'm happy to talk about it. One of the ways is to do short-term borrowing, and you can use short-term cash to be able to pay your debt service until that increment materializes, or you can do pooled cash if you have it. The municipalities do it both ways. It is a short-term problem because it's the first project is the only time that's going to be really relevant. Thank you.
You mentioned 10 years for this entire process. Now, say like you do have project, like you said, Family Dollar across the street all the way to the causeway. And I'm not sure, do you have to have the same developer? Can you have different things? I mean, does it kind of go beyond 10 years for each project? How does that work?
Great question. So you have 10 years in which to incur debt, the municipality. So the TIF, you could start across the street next year, 3 years from now, you could work on Fideli's. Totally different developer if you want to do that. You could work on the J.J. Newberry building 5 years from now, which is generally how things happen. Because of what you just heard, you're going to need to take out probably a small bond each time so that you can pay for the infrastructure. You might not want to do that all at once. And you probably won't find a developer that wants to do all that, or 5 developers that want to do all that. But what the TIF does is it gives you time to put all those projects in place. And already, the group is thinking about who are the developers and what's the first project and what's the second project. They already have some ideas about what those might be, because once you start the clock on that 10 years, you want to get all your projects in the queue. But then you have a period of time in which to pay off that bond.
10 years to incur the debt from the time you get a district, and then from the time you take your first bond, you have 20 years to retain the increment. So you do the 20 years of retention that pays down the debt service, and you pay it off however long it takes, with only that 20 years of money. But sometimes you have a 30-year bond, sometimes you have a 25-year conventional loan, whatever it takes to pay it off. But you're going to only use the money you've accumulated in the 20. But I think your point, the 10 is really the most important number, because you only have 10 years to get your projects started, and you can go beyond 10 while you're constructing. If you get it approved and take your money out in year 10, you can build for a couple more years, whenever it takes that long. Also, in other parts of the state, they've gotten extensions. So if you hear that like Barry's had a district and St. Albans has had a district forever, it's because legislature approved some extensions. Barry got flooded, pandemic happened, things we never saw coming in 2010 when we started those districts. So those are exceptions.
And take a question from Hal.
So, these being long-term projects, how many TIF projects have been, I have to ask this so I can kind of couch the second part. How many TIF projects have been started and completed to date?
Yeah, but you're the state, you should know this. I haven't worked on every TIF project, so I don't have a firm answer for that. There's several that have been started and finished. Milton, for example, has several started and finished. And by finished, do you mean all debt paid, or you mean project completion?
Project completion.
Project completion, I'd venture to say there's 20 to 30 across the state, because Burlington, I can name the communities: Burlington, Hartford, Barry, South Burlington, St. Albans, all have districts that have done projects that are completed and built and generating revenue right now.
Gotcha. And when we look at like those 20 or 30 projects, what percentage of those would the community say were a failure?
I mean, 0. They've all been successfully built. Some of what I would say is a messaging issue is the fact that there's been 2 or 3 now, districts that got approval to be a district, never went for a bond, never did a project, and said, actually, we don't want a district. We can't use it. And they turned it back in. They lost money on the administration of it and the project management to seek it, the way that you sometimes go for a grant and you don't end up getting it. So there were some sunk costs, probably $100,000 or less over the course of 5 years of economic development work, but they didn't lose money because they just decided it wasn't the right tool at the right time.
Thank you.
And one of the reasons that you want to hire a firm like White & Burke is that they have the formula. They know what the questions are. They know what this VEPC council is looking for. They provide them with very similar reports so that they, again, know what they're looking at. It's vetted very, very well by the state, which is us and the VEPC council. But the creation of this, there's a lot of work. And so there are very few, if any, communities that can do this on their own without hiring a consultant to do that. Stephanie won't say that, I can say that.
I wanted to be a ballerina when I saw it.
Hi, I'd like to talk about the first year when the building is beginning to be built, and the city, you call it a municipality, I call it the taxpayers. We, the taxpayers, have to pay back for a year at least on that loan until the building is, as I understand it, completed, because it's only when the building is completed that the tax increment is established, and from then on, they pay on a different, the increment winds up in the city's pocket for the most part. Or if the building takes longer than a year, we pay the service or the extra taxes for that year. Am I correct, or have I missed something?
There's two corrections. One is that, let's say you use a bond, and let's say you have pooled cash to pay the debt service. Now, we structure bonds with 0% interest for, or zero interest, not percent interest, but zero, it's called a, actually, we'll do an interest-only bond in this scenario. Interest only, so you're not paying any principal for 3-4 years. And so you really reduce how much that cash that's going out is in those early years. But remember, it's a TIF fund. So what you're doing is maybe most communities will use pooled cash if they have other funds where they can loan it to that payment for that particular year. So they pay $100,000 in interest for 4 years, and they use other funds to pay for that. Eventually, when the increment comes in, they pay that back. It's not like that money is gone forever. It goes back to those original sources once you see increment. So again, it's a fund. It's not like you're paying that out of pocket. The other piece is partial appraisal, partial assessment. If a project is done and starts construction, after the first year, it's going to have some more value. Usually, sometimes it can be 20% if they've started later in the year. It could be 50%. So you see a partial appraisal, so a partial increase. So you start to see some increment come off of it. If you do short-term borrowing, if you don't have pooled cash, I have to make the disclaimer that the legislature decided that the interest on that short-term instrument is not TIF eligible. So that does have a cost to the taxpayer, which is unfortunate. And we've tried to fight that, and we've lost at the legislature.
So the pooled cash becomes a really interesting question, right? Like, are there any other ways for the city to generate money other than through taxation to help with that pooled fund? And I ask that because I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody does in Newport's case.
And it's generally very low. We're talking maybe $5,000 in interest that on that short-term borrowing instrument that have to be paid by the city. It's small amounts because these are short-term instruments, but it still, I disagree with it fundamentally, but that's where you're at. So it is best if you can come up with it internally, and hopefully you're talking about a project that's going to happen very quickly, and you put off your borrowing as tightly as you can. You try to make that a really fast turnaround.
Let me just look and see if people who haven't asked questions want a chance first. Okay.
So I have maybe a couple of questions. The first two with the TIF. You talk about a TIF district. Is that this street to this street? Is that all of Newport? What does that mean in our case?
Yep, it's a district. It can be any size. It's typically just it's a smaller subset of your full city. Typically, your designated downtown is a typical area.
Okay. Second part of that question, when it comes to the infrastructure, all of ours are. Like all this stuff is literally on Main Street. And so we're aware that our infrastructure is likely going to have to change from top to bottom, as we say, and including the water and sewer plant because we're talking about increased use. Would that be done all at the beginning, or can it be done over the course? I mean, that's a lot of money, but do we do that at the very beginning?
It's like you've been living in my head for the last few months, because that's 100% what we're wondering about. How do you sequence it? Can you phase it? But the main thing is, but for the city doing this investment in the infrastructure, that development wouldn't happen. So sometimes we have to ask the question to make the numbers work, what is the minimum we can put in place to open their doors knowing that then there will be money coming in. And when you start a TIF district, the beauty of a district is that you have multiple properties, and now, yes, you invested in this one, but the one across the street, you didn't really have to do anything, but now they're gonna do something different, and that increment comes back to the fund, so you can do more phases of whatever you need to do. So you can phase it, or you have to do it all at the front end, because sometimes you can't phase a water line, for example. One of the trickiest parts, which is why I've been working for the city for a year and we haven't made an application yet, is because you have to have a developer in hand before you start anything. You have to have a real project with private taxable dollars coming to the table before you can't just build a district and do the if you build it, they will come model. So you have to have a developer, a development agreement, a plan, and the hardest part is making those numbers work, because it's usually the largest amount of infrastructure needed up front, it's the short-term cash issue, it's also the related costs of a district. When you administer a district, there's a bunch of related costs over the course of the whole district, and you have to show that that all pencils with your very first project, because there's no guarantee you're gonna have a second, third, fourth project. So yes, it's a challenge. I don't have a better answer for that.
My third question, yes, that last one. So my third question is economic development without a TIF. Having been here for almost 20 years and actively participating, we've recommended, we've seen all sorts of, suggestions. We are bordered by the Canadian border, and they don't think, businesses from far away they don't even consider the populations that come across the border. How do we overcome that? And is everything we're doing now have to be tied up with the TIF? Is there other ways to go about increasing economic development here that might not actually be through the TIF?
I'm going to say one comment, and I know you have a response. I see economic development. I was hired under a TIF contract, and as the team will tell you, I've started just slowly, my nomenclature changed in the last 6 months to just stop saying TIF consultant. I'm the economic development consultant, because every time we meet, what we're doing is all the pieces of economic development. And yes, TIF is one funding source, but CHIP is another. Catalyst from Northern Borders Regional Planning, or Regional Commission, tax stabilization. There's a lot of different tools to get a lot of things built. But if you don't have the partners at the table, if you don't have the interested parties at the table, the ones who are actually gonna put money into the capital, into the projects, if there's not market demand, none of the funding for infrastructure matters. So really what we've done is we've turned the model around and said, let's not figure out to find the money to solve the infrastructure. We have to find what's the business that's gonna thrive here, how can we make the housing more affordable to build, bring down that cost every way we can. And so I think we're throwing everything at it right now, Laurie, that we can. That's what
Great. Hi. Frank Cheney, long-term citizen of Newport. I work for the city as well. I wholeheartedly agree, being responsible for the assessed values in the city, that the problem is really on the revenue side. And my comment is, or question, is what's the cost of doing nothing? Because what I'm seeing in relationship to increased costs related to inflation and other things, compared to the amount of yearly increase in the property values, paints a very interesting picture. And what does Newport look like in 10 years? In other words, what is the cost of doing nothing?
And I can tell you from a statewide perspective, we had to do some of this number crunching just in recapping some of the TIF districts that exist. And if you look at the grand list in St. Albans before they had a TIF district, it was not just plateauing, it was declining, because you had decaying stock and everything else, and their tax rates were rising as a result. Since the TIF district and what their grand list has done on this trajectory, their tax rates are some of the lowest in the state. So look at your own trajectory. What is your grand list doing? What are your taxes doing? So, and you can see it in every district in the state, and not just only TIF districts. If you look at the more successful communities who've been doing economic development, to Lori's point, it may not just be TIF, it's a lot of things that you're doing. So there could be communities out there doing a lot too, but they don't need TIF as a particular tool. But that's what you gotta look for.
I would agree with everything you just said. So going back to, and I've lost my train of thought, can you tell? The cost of doing nothing. Thank you. There was a discussion about that in Rutland. What if we just don't do anything? And it came back to, then 50 years from now, we're going to be looking at that pit. And so we just need to do something. And this is a starting point. And there are no guarantees, but if you can get that developer who is interested and they know the costs are going to come down because the infrastructure is going to be in place, you have a great chance of moving forward.
Go ahead, John.
My name's John Hollamert. I've been in the city since '87, retired fire chief. I have a little bit of a broad spectrum question. The picture that we're looking at is the 5-year capital plan that was put out, and I believe it was 400 plus housing units in the downtown corridor. My question is twofold. One, according to what I'm hearing, this is all private equity investment in the community, correct?
Private equity, yes, in the projects.
Okay. Yes. So my question is, where are we going to get 400, we're going to fill 425 units. You're talking about 800 to 1,000 people coming to the city, when the biggest problem that we have is we don't have employment for those people. I know this is a bit of a catch-22, but I think it's a big picture item that we need to look at, because you're not going to bring 1,000 plus people into the area. We only have 4,300 people in the community right now. You're talking about a 25% increase in the community. My second question involved with that is, have we thought, and I know historically the city has stayed away from it, but I will tell you this, you bring in that many housing units, there's going to be some impact fees needed. And I know historically we've stayed away from that, but I think the chief will agree with me that many housing units are going to increase demand on public services.
Great comments. What I would suggest is it's not all going to happen all at the same time, that it will be incremental over time. And part of this TIF process is there is an economic specialist that you would actually pay a little bit of money for to look at the project to make sure that it actually pencils out. And what types of things are you going to need to begin to look at in the future? So Killington, for example, recognized that they might need another police officer, and that they might need another public works person, and that they might need another fire department person. And so they actively began to budget for those things, recognizing that overall, at the end of the day, it's going to help the grand list, which will then pay off those positions in the future. But you didn't need them right away because the projects weren't done, but you will have, to your point, will there be additional costs for other things? Yes, but it'll be incremental over time and it should pay itself off.
And there's a technical piece that when you retain, he glossed over the math because it is really nerdy, but there is a piece of this that you actually only might retain 85% of that new increment from the new properties, but 15 of that percent would go to the general fund. That tends to offset sometimes the impact of, new people on your roads, etc. The second thing I want to say is, I kind of think that'd be an amazing problem to have. I personally am hearing it across the state that it is impossible to find labor because they can't find housing, and so businesses are suffering. And I would hope that then that would be the residual positive impact.
Okay, I've got a question from online. Jennifer Hopkins has a question. Kitty's got a question. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy us 10 more minutes. I'm going to ask if there's somebody from the staff who could run downstairs and let them know that we're going to be about 10 more minutes. Thanks, Travis. We're going to take questions from people who haven't asked questions already. Lyle has promised to stay until at least midnight tonight. So we'll take as many questions as possible, and then please don't consider our formal ending the end of the conversation. Come downstairs, have lunch, and grab Stephanie or Lyle or any of us to have further conversation. The online question from Chris Carrington is, do we have businesses that are currently expressing interest in being that private equity or that private investment? Stephanie, you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we do. Yes, we have active, interested developers, property owners who have expressed interest if they did not have to pay for XYZ part of their project. Maybe that's land acquisition cost. That's a common one where we can buy up a piece of property and then sell it for $1 to make sure that that's not a part of their cost. That just helps bring down the cost per unit when we're talking about housing. That takes down cost per unit, which ends up in cost per unit for rental rate. And the other is, ideally, we're gonna acquire properties and go out with an RFP. And we're gonna say, bring us your ideas and here's what we can give you in return. Because the name of the game is how do we use our power as a municipality and these tools to infuse money into projects that don't make any sense, that are not working and lagging, and how do you infuse that money? Through infrastructure. So we start to advertise that and you start to see people come to the table. We're doing that all over the state right now.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Right now, we're talking about the pit, so we don't, okay, we don't own the pit, so how do we finance owning it, or can somebody else own it besides the developer?
Yes.
We were just in a meeting about this 2 days ago, I don't know.
So all I can say about ownership of the pit is stay tuned. We're working on that. Because I know that there is what's the terminology of the gentleman that now is...
Oh, the court-appointed receiver who has control over that process.
The receiver is trying to set a deadline to make sure that the pit is disposed of. We are well aware of those deadlines, hence the conversation we were having with the governor this week. Which is all I can say about that. So, because he's taking my picture and probably she's recording what I'm saying.
Kitty?
Stephanie, I just want to make sure I understand. So a development company comes in and let's say we do a bond and we have to do a whole bunch of the water right down Main Street in order for them to even start. Then they start, and let's say they're trying to be done in 2 years. It takes them 5 years to open their doors. During those 5 years, what taxes do they pay? Do they pay the minimum that you were talking about, the guaranteed, or is that doesn't kick in for a while?
It's negotiated in the development agreement depending on the terms of whatever we can borrow. So we need to set out what we can afford and work it out with the developer. And the idea is we float for a couple of years, we float the debt service, but once they're under construction and once they start having taxable value, increased taxable value, we can start using those taxes to pay things down. And then it gets to that minimum I was explaining. Occasionally you can work it out in the development agreement that they have a minimum during construction too. So that would get to that point of, okay, we expect you'll be at 20% completion after year 1 and 60% completion after year 2. So that if it's when it's especially a multi-year project like that, if it's a lot of projects are a 1-year construction. So we don't have that issue. But that's why I say it can be spelled out in the development agreement.
Okay, is there anyone who hasn't asked a question publicly who would like to still? Okay, go ahead, Ellen. Yep.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Eleanor Leger, and I own Eden Ciders, which produces cider in the basement at 150 Main Street. I also am the manager and part owner of that building. So there's a bunch of investors who bought that building originally in 2013, just as the EB5 projects were being announced. So it was in anticipation of all kinds of good things happening that obviously didn't happen. If you want to talk more about what it's like to own a major building in downtown Newport and try to balance what rent you can charge to tenants with the infrastructure costs and our experience of a wonderful tax stabilization program which has now run out. So we can't charge any more rent now than we could 10 years ago, and our taxes are now, instead of $4,000, they're going to be about $18,000. And the quality of tenants that we can attract because of the state of downtown Newport is, not the quality that can enhance the building and its appearance and all of that. This is not a question. I just want to offer, as somebody who is essentially the private equity that went in 2013, what the experience has been like, and if you'd like to learn more about it, and opportunities.
Come have a hot dog.
Come have a hot dog with me downstairs.
So, go ahead, Lyle.
Just one comment on that. One of the things that we did in Rutland when I was in my role in Rutland was we got the businesses in downtown together and we began to talk about there will be disruption because of this. And so how do we make sure that we attract people into downtown still? How do we celebrate the dirt? How do we make sure people know what the process is going to be? And it's interesting, all the great ideas that were generated from that to bring people downtown and to have a street party and to do the things that you could have the kids come down and touch the big rig that's down there that's going to be digging on Monday. Those are the types of things that we did to advertise what's about to happen in Rutland.
Okay, so could we please give a round of applause to both Lyle and Stephanie? Lyle left home in Rutland this morning at 6 a.m. and Stephanie came up from Burlington area, so thank you both for that. And just a couple of final thank yous and a logistics item. I want to start by saying, first of all, I have such huge gratitude for all of you. 4.5 hours is, I guess 4 hours. 4 hours is not a small investment of your time, and we knew it was a tall order, so it is huge that you all came this morning to have this conversation. If you would like to continue to be involved in these conversations in the short term over the next 2 weeks about budget, talk to a council member or Carrie or myself or someone. And yes, this has made it all the way around. If you haven't signed the sheet, we will be sending a note to everybody who showed up today and signed the sheet with answers to some of the questions you've raised today. So that's the first thing. In terms of how we get from here to the budget, I'm just going to name, first of all, this brings me to my second round of thanks. This council, over the last year, has been heroic in its effort to try and get us to this moment. So I want to say thank you to the council members for all of the work they put in, many, many hours of effort. And that brings me to Carter and the members of the finance task force that stepped up really with no idea of how deep we were going to have to go. We were elected, we seated the new council members on March 4th last year, and 5 days later, we held a special meeting and assigned the two task forces, water and sewer and finance, without knowing really what it was going to lead to. And so for all of those task force members, the water and sewer and this task force in particular, thank you for all of your effort. And one round of applause, please, because Carter has put in hours and hours and hours working with us to get us to this point as well. So that brings me to what's happening now for the rest of the month. Many of you know that the council is also in a conversation about modernizing the charter. I'm not going to speak for or against it today. If you want to be a part of that conversation, come to the public hearing. We will have two. The first one will be held Wednesday night, the 21st. Wednesday the 21st, 6 p.m. upstairs in the municipal council room. And that will be an open public hearing. Anyone can speak. The council will be listening and maybe speaking as well, but they will not be making decisions that night about changes to the charter or where we go from here. That's the first one. The second meeting for public hearing will be part of the regular council meeting held on Monday night, January 26th. It will be the first item on the agenda. It's now already been warned legally. And so at 6 o'clock that Monday night, we'll have a second round of public engagement and conversation about the charter and the wisdom of moving ahead and any changes we might want to make. After we gavel that hearing to a closure within the regular council meeting, the regular council meeting will continue, and the council's primary job that night will be to come to a final set of recommendations about the budget we spent 2 hours on this morning. So hopefully by Monday night, we will have a recommendation to the voters for a budget for them to consider on March 3rd. If we don't, we will have to call another conversation before January 31st. Jim's not here, but we have to finish the budget recommendations no later than the 31st of January. Is that right, Jim? 30th, January 30th. So if for some reason we can't come to that final decision on that Monday night, we'll have to meet again that week in order to get something before the voters in time. And then yet another meeting will happen on Wednesday night, 2 days later, the 28th of January. We will have a meeting. At the moment, we're thinking it's primarily going to be focused on any final consideration the council wants to make following the public hearings regarding the charter, and whether or not we intend as a council to put a new charter in front of the voters for their up or down vote on the 3rd of March. So you have all kinds of opportunity to get involved, and we would be thrilled if as many people who showed up today showed up for these council meetings. So please keep them in front of you and pay attention. We'll keep trying to get the word out as best we can. Is there anything else I've got to cover on those logistics? All right, then here's the last thing. The logistics for how to get downstairs are, so that we don't drag this on all afternoon, please do not ask all your questions of staff or Lyle or Stephanie or any of us here. Go downstairs, find them over lunch, so that we can get the lunch process started and it doesn't start half an hour from now. So let's move the conversation downstairs, and you may stay as long as you like this afternoon, but we'll probably stop serving you hot dogs at some point in the process. One last time, thank you so much everyone for coming out today, and we'll be in much more conversation over the weeks to come.